Welcome everyone to MogTalk. Today is February 4th, 2017. It is Saturday, of course. And if you guys are unfamiliar with MogTalk, it is a show based around talking to the Final Fantasy XIV community about anything from Savage Raiding to Chocobo Racing to why Astrologians are absolutely ridiculous right now, which is today's topic, is the Astro show. I want to go ahead and introduce our guest. Our guests are absolutely amazing guests today to talk about Astro. I'm going to go just round robin here. First, I'm going to start with someone you guys should be kind of familiar with, who's usually in the chat moderating for us, and has been my personal healer throughout this entire game. Karara. Hey, Kur, how you doing?
Hi. Good.
Good?
Pretty good.
Yeah? So, Kur, real quick, so everybody knows kind of where you are with Astro. How long have you been playing Astro? Kind of what's your experience with Astro?
I touched a little bit in Midas. We couldn't play it at first because our scholar wanted to go Astro, and he dropped out pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
So I stuck with White Mage for a while, and then this tier, I pretty much have been running Astro the whole time. So not too long, I guess, just whenever this tier came out. So
yeah. And Kur, you're going to be kind of our casual healer guest, if you don't mind me saying that.
totally casual.
Yeah. Kur and my group is a very casual group, and we brought on two guests who are absolutely phenomenal, ridiculous astrologians. One that you guys have seen before on the show one time, just a couple of weeks ago, and he was so good, we're like, hey, dude, we're going to get you on again. I wanted him on like the week right afterwards, but I was like, he's like, no, man, I got life. I got things I got to do. I was like, all right, dude, Bach. How you doing, Bach?
Doing great, man. Thanks. You're too kind.
Oh, man. No, can never be too kind to you, dude. So, Bach, I do have a question for you. Of course, I want to ask you the same thing. What's your experience with playing Astrologian?
My experience with Astro, I started playing it halfway through Midas, actually. So still somewhat recent. Long story short, we had to replace our White Mage for reasons, and couldn't find one, but our ninja's best friend was a warrior, and I was the warrior in our group. So I volunteered to switch to accommodate bringing him into the static, and so I kind of had to switch on a whim and learn how to heal in a short period of time, and kind of fell in love with it, and yeah, here I am.
Yeah. So you didn't choose the Astrolife. The Astrolife chose you?
I guess so.
Yeah?
I guess it was in the cards.
Okay.
Sorry, my bad. I'm sorry.
Oh
I'm
my
sorry.
God.
I'm sorry. That won't happen again.
It was good. No, that was great. Thank you. I hope you guys come up with more card puns. I'm perfectly okay with it. I'll tell you when I'm too tired of it, and then I'll kick you off the show. But
Okay.
next, we have a first-time guest who has been highly recommended to be on this show, and probably one of the best Astros out there as well. Of course, I'm sure some of you guys in chat know who he is. Sai Fujiwara. What's up, dude?
Hey, how's it going? Glad to be on the show.
Glad to have you, man. So when we did the Paladin show back a few months ago, we had Call Me Hoops on, and right after we were done with that show, he was like, hey, are you going to do an Astro show? I was like, yeah, at some point, I'm sure. He's like, all right, let me know when, because this is the person you need to get on the show. I don't care who else you get on there, but this person has to be on the show. I was like, all right, I guess. And then for the next couple of months, he would constantly remind me, no, Sai needs to be on this show. Well, when are you having it? You need to make sure he gets on that show. So, welcome, Sai.
That's one of the things about Hoops. He's basically like a professional badgerer, so you probably didn't have any choice at some point.
It's like a little secret hype man almost, like just kind of in the background. Yeah. I got you, dude. Tell me your experience with Astrologian.
Yeah, so I had been doing basically World Prog as White Mage through Midas, and then in Creator I wasn't doing World Prog anymore, and I just kind of decided, I'm gonna pick up Astro, learn something new. I kind of felt like my White Mage was close to mastery at that point, and I would just be learning the new fights. But I decided since I was going to be doing the tier at a slower pace, I might as well pick up a new class and add to myself as a player. So I've been maining Astro since the beginning of Creator, really. And yeah, it just kind of turned out well with the patch changes, but you can consider me a fair weather Astro.
Fair.
Either way, I suppose, yeah.
All right. So I do have when the audio's not matching. Do you wait a minute? Hold on. The awkward moment where I can hear Sai twice, but the audio is not matching. Is he listening to you, like off on the side or something?
It depends on who's speaking.
Rosie.
I don't have the chat open. Oh yeah, she lives with me, so that's probably what it is.
She's the one who called this show shit, a bitch show.
Yeah, that's her. She said
okay.
said that I would do your bitch show.
My bitch show. All right. So she's never gonna get on this show. Screw her. She can never be on the bitch show of MogTalk. She's done. But anyways, guys, thank you all for tuning in today. It was absolutely fantastic to get this together. I'm excited because the last Astro show we had was in 3.2, around 3.2, I think. 3.3, and this was before Astros became like absolutely phenomenal. They were great in a good spot during that patch, but no one really believed it except for, of course, Bach. Bach believed it. I've talked to him multiple times about how he believed the Astros were very good.
Man.
Yeah. But I feel like we have to come back and revisit it because it's definitely changed a lot since then. And now basically you have to have an astrologian in your group or it's not considered even remotely close to meta. So we're going to talk about it today. The other parts that I want to talk about, it's really interesting how Square Enix responds to players and how they adjust their jobs. Astrologian is a perfect example of what happens when people maybe whine a little too much about a job and how people don't play the job and they're like, oh, well, we got to get people in there, or that's what it seems like. But I want to discuss that a little bit. I also want to discuss what type of player plays Astro, and then, you know, give you guys a little bit of tips if you guys care to have tips or not. Hopefully the show can suit people who sort of play Astro to people who play Astro and close to World Prog. I think that, you know, there's a lot of World Proggers out there with Astro now. I don't think they have white mages anymore, but, you know. All right, so before we get into it, I do want to talk about, of course, first, if you're playing Astro, kind of what kind of healer is it? Because we know white mage is kind of a straightforward, to me, I'll go ahead and categorize it the way I see it. White mage is a regen healer. You go out there, pure base healer, awesome. Get to Scholar, you got your shields, and you have a little pet you can manage. Then you got Astro, which just seems like it used to be a weaker white mage that gave out cards and buffs. Could you guys give me your idea of what type of role Astro really fills as a healer? Like if you had to compare it to just, you know, in a broad spectrum of healers. And I'll start with you, Bach, if that's all right.
With me, okay. All right. Well, I see Astro as kind of they kind of contribute on multiple fronts, right? So they're really well rounded. I mean, you got everything. You got regens, and if you're playing with a white mage, you need shields. You can have shields. You have mitigation, and you provide damage. You know, maybe not just your own personal damage, but also you know, with your cards too. You know, you're contributing through your teammates by giving them cards. So Astro's kind of I see them as the most well-rounded healer. They're kind of good at everything.
Mm-hmm. So you said that they could give shields. How many Astros out there actually play the spec where they give out shields?
Are we all diurnal Astros here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think that has more to do with the Scholar being overpowered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which they totally are, and they're just a really popular class because they're just so strong and they provide so much control, and they're just super fun, right?
Right.
But you know, white mage and nocturnal Astro still viable. I mean, a lot of groups make it work. A lot of groups cleared this content really quickly with it and put up some pretty good kills. But you know, as strong as Scholar is, but you know, they do give shields. So you know, if Astro's playing with a white mage and the fight calls for, you know, some shielding, then, you know, you do have that option.
Right. And it's kind of interesting how they have that set up. And I assume Square Enix created Astro is supposed to be like a support healer. And in the end, they were supposed to just fill in wherever they could. They're like, oh, you're playing for White Mage? Okay, you can play for White Mage if you change your spec and you play this kind of direction. And it's kind of interesting that you talk about who here is Dineural, who here is Noct, because when you are that type of Astro, do you not easily interchange between the two? Is it not something that you can just say, hey, I play Astro, and you just assume that you can easily do both? Or if you play Noct, are you just really good at Noct versus being really good at Dineural? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think their kits are more or less the same. It's just now you're, instead of regenning, you're shielding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little different. Like, you treat your heals, you know, particularly your aspected Benefic and aspected Helios, you treat them a little differently in Nocturnal as you do in Diurnal. So they don't play totally different. But I guess when I say I'm a Diurnal Astro, I mean it more in the sense as my healing partner is a Scholar, so therefore I find myself in Diurnal all the time. But you never know. You join a party finder group, you really want to play Astro, and your co-healer is a White Mage.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you don't have Scholar unlocked or something like that, or I don't know. What if you just really want to play Astro and you're playing with a White Mage? Then yeah, right.
Okay, yeah. So it doesn't completely eliminate them. That makes sense. And so it's funny because that means that White Mage and Scholar, they don't have to change anything when they get to a group, but an Astro has to be a little bit more flexible and change to fit whatever the group is, which is fine. It's just it's kind of, the person has to just know how to fill roles in those groups. Sai, when you switched to Astro, do you feel like it was any different of a role than when you were playing White Mage?
I do, yeah. I think Bach hit on most of the points with Astro. Like, first of all, it's versatile, right? Because you've got the differing sects that you can use. But then he also touched on the party utility, which unfortunately White Mage isn't in a very good place right now. And so I guess, like, during Prog, and we'll talk about card usage later as well, but like during Prog, you can use your cards a lot more creatively. You know, basically anything that's going to help, whether it's tossing a bowl on a weekend party member or helping out with MP or TP. Like, you have that facet of the job that isn't there for White Mage. So your role's a little bit different in that sense. And because of that, you kind of have to, like, every healer needs to be the type of player that is watching the entire group and what they're doing. But with Astro, even a little more so, right? Because if you're watching TP, potentially, you're potentially watching MP, you're watching when DPS are popping their cooldowns so that you can use your balances effectively and things like that. And then the other part of your, I guess, party utility is you have magic mitigation, right? Which White Mage unfortunately doesn't have. So you bring the bubble, which is a 10%, and then you also have disable every minute, which is 10%. Whereas on White Mage, you do have utility, like you have Eye for an Eye, which you should be using as often as possible, and you also have a physical virus, which, if you're clever, you can usually find ways to use, but it's not at the same level, right? It's kind of auxiliary utility, whereas like disable and the bubble, those are like going to be some of the main things you integrate into like your rotation, right? Mm-hmm. So I do feel like it's a little more, in a sense, you're still, Bach might cringe at this a little bit, you're still kind of like the main healer in a sense. Like, a lot of stuff's going to fall to you in a typical group with Diurnal, Astro, and Scholar, but there's that other, so in that sense it's the same as a White Mage, right? But then you've got the extra things that you're delivering to the party, that White Mage just doesn't. So
right. And so I guess, would you guys put like White Mage at the same position that you'd put like Paladin at?
Oh, that's a good question. Like, I've gotten into some arguments with people on Reddit over this. Like, I still think that in terms of healing, White Mage generally has a bit of an edge over Astro, and it's not in every case. There's certain cases where like Sinistry is just super powerful, so I would rather be Astro. But if you take the cards away, and I have some arguments for this, if you just look at the meta and how it's changed, and you look at the patch notes, like Diurnal Astro hasn't, like the healing hasn't changed. Like the meta now is we have to have Astro, but if you look at the patch for 3.4, the only thing that changed with regards to healing for Astro is the Benefic 2 proc, right?
Mm-hmm.
It used to
That's
be
right.
you had a,
That's right.
yeah, you used to be you had a 15% chance to proc an instant Benefic 2, and now you get a crit Benefic 2, which through this tier I can say it's a lot better. I would definitely call it a buff. Like it's really nice to have that, but that's not the type of thing where there's no way that's the magic thing that made Astro better, right? It's really the cards. So I still feel like White Mage is kind of stronger in terms of healing, but I guess I don't know. They kind of are like a paladin in the sense that like they can get the job done. They're completely viable, but if you're going for like a top level speed clear, it's going to be hard to fit a White Mage in there. Actually, probably even harder to fit a White Mage than with a Paladin, depending on the fight, I would say. Like,
yeah.
I have heard like the other way too, though, where bringing Astro brings more of that RNG. So the speed runs maybe get messed up because of that.
So, I mean, that's kind of like my whole discussion with Astro. So if you take away, this is me not playing Astro, right? And not being a person who actually understands the job very well. But like if you bring Astro into the group and you take away cards completely, 100%, and then you go White Mage versus Astro, who wins in that scenario?
It depends on the fight. Like,
depends on the fight.
So they're even.
Yeah. That's, I mean, well, I think, sorry to cut you off, Buck. Like, I still think that White Mage in general, like if we're not talking about a particular fight, I still think White Mage in general is a bit stronger, right? Because Divine Seal is 30% versus Sinistry, which is only 20%. Like with Presence of Mind, you actually heal faster. You have an asynchronous heal, right? You have a size, which is an area where, well, you have a size and you have Cure 3. And AoE healing throughput is an area where Astro is lacking, right? And you can make up for that by working with your co-healer. But if you're just talking about in terms of raw healing, those are the areas where White Mage still does have an edge. The other areas, they have 2 direct instant heals, right? So you have Tetra, and you also have Benny. If you actually do the math, like within 10 minutes, like since Essential Dignity is on such a short cooldown, it's only like 40 seconds, right? You're going to get basically you're going to get more Essential Dignities, even though there's only one of them versus your Tetra and your Benny, because the cooldown is just so much shorter. But having 2 instants in certain conditions, you can use them back to back, which is really powerful. But I guess the example I would use to explain why it depends on the fight is like in A12, after you killed the General's Wings, like the Almost Holy ads, and you go into the Time and the Might, like Sinistry there is just so powerful. Like, so right there, I want to be an Astro more than I want to be a White Mage. But there might be, for healing, there's other situations where, okay, if I'm just considering healing, White Mage would be stronger here, right? So like A11, for example, dealing with photons, like a size and Cure 3 are going to help a lot. Whereas if I'm on Astro, all I can do is get, kind of the aspected Helios up. And then after that, you're just pumping out GCD per GCD of Helios. That's all you can do. So you end up needing more help from your co-healer in that sort of case. Whereas White Mage could, if you wanted to, you could just solo that easily.
Right. It's a lot more burst healing on White Mage, for sure. And also, it's also AoE damage as well for White Mage, where you have Arrow 3 and Holy.
Okay.
That's true too. If we were to bring older fights into it, there were fights where I would prefer a White Mage, and like Medica 2 range, sometimes that's relevant too.
Yeah.
Benediction's
So
really
nice.
nice when you want to rely on Living Dead to deal with the mechanic, because rather than rather than putting Sinistry on your target and using multiple GCDs to heal that target, for your Dark Knight. A White Mage can do that without ever leaving Cleric stance with Benediction. And Benediction's cooldown, it lines up really, it lines up perfectly with Living Dead because they're both 5 minutes, right? So there's that too. But to answer your earlier question, is it like Paladin? You might hate me for this, Frosty.
Sure.
But I would say that White Mage is not as bad as Paladin.
Okay. Let's go into the reasoning.
Let me explain. Let me explain.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does Astro provide that? Like, what made Astro meta?
Balance, right? Yeah, balance.
20%
Balance. Yeah. And okay, Sai brought up that point is like Astro healing, diurnal Astro healing didn't really change. So what made it change? And it was the card buffs, to be honest, right? And not to say that the job is centered only around the cards, because it's not, but that's what pushed them over the top. But you could bring a White Mage where you bring an Astro. White Mage's personal damage output is actually higher than Astro because of things like Assize, Fluid Aura, and Presence of Mind. And to a lesser extent, Stone 3 does more damage than Malefic 2, right? So on average, equally skilled players, White Mage is probably going to put out, maybe about 10-15% more damage than the Astro. So they somewhat make up for it. Not quite. Your party members might be a little sad that they can't get cards, and you're missing a little bit of mitigation, but that's it. But when it comes to a Paladin, when you bring a Paladin over a Dark Knight, it affects your teammates. It affects the way the healers heal you. It also affects what kind of team comp you can have, because now if you want int down, you have to bring a monk now. So that might mean not having a dragoon, or might not. It means not having a ninja, right? So now you have to pick and choose which group buffs you want. Where if you played a Dark Knight instead of a Paladin, you're like, okay, now we can go dragoon, ninja, yada yada, right? So bringing a Paladin affects what kind of team comp you can bring, whereas bringing a White Mage doesn't really do that. It just makes some people sad that they can't get balance, right? So
you say sad, it makes them utterly depressed.
Yes.
They go into a corner and they cry about how they're never going to get higher on FF logs.
Right, yeah, sure.
Paladin kind of has that effect too, in a way, because you do lose out on one of the melee jobs, unless if you just do a melee comp, then it doesn't matter anymore, because you can run machinist and then 3 melee, right, and you get all the buffs that you want.
Now you're missing Bard.
Yeah, but you got
right. So
machinist.
You're gonna lose something when you bring monk. You gotta lose something else, right?
Right, because I mean the ideal comp right now, you bring in a machinist, a bard, and a ninja and a dragoon, right?
That's like the god comp, as people say, the triple dex comp. That's what people use for speed runs, because every group provides some sort of group synergy, or every DPS class provides some sort of group synergy, right?
Yeah.
Whereas monk doesn't, right?
So I know we had to have a show about Astros that eventually led to Paladins in some way or another. So Paladins are great, and fuck you. So on to the next point.
Wow.
No, I mean I'm
sorry. I knew I was going to upset you.
It's okay. No. I have my own thoughts and my own reasoning for why Paladin makes it in this world in the way that people believe it doesn't. I can have things that counter. I don't know how to say that. I have reasons for why I think Paladin has a really good role in the game.
I feel like you cornered us into this question.
Yeah,
right.
You
I
can
did.
Do you want me to defend you a bit, Frosty?
No defense. No.
Well, because I play with a paladin.
You do.
Actually, a lot of the points, all of the points that Buck brought up were really good, but I get to play with a paladin a lot, and then sometimes when I run speedruns with other groups, it's obviously a Dark Knight. And I will say that, like, Divine Veil is huge, like in certain areas in terms of Bach was talking about. It changes how you have to heal, but that's one of like the positive changes that Paladin brings in terms of how you have to heal. And then it kind of depends on the fight, but Hollowed Ground is really, really good. Like when you're doing a speed run as a healer and you just want to get as many GCDs out as possible, and you can use Hollowed Ground, for example, in A9 to cover 2 of the scrap tank busters in a row. Yeah, that's really huge.
And people don't, they say, oh yeah, no, Living Dead is so much better, or whatever, but then when you think about it, Hollowed Ground completely prevents the healers from having to use GCDs or use abilities. For example, if you had the lineup of Benediction, you now don't have Benediction for anything except for Living Dead if you're lining up for that. You don't have it for an emergency situation. You don't have any other place you put it. You have to use it for Living Dead if you're going to play it like that. If you're going to say, hey, no, Benediction works perfect. So that it deletes that ability from your White Mage, which you're not running with a White Mage anyways because you have an Astro. But that's my whole defense for it. But go ahead. Sorry.
Bach already brought up the Living Dead thing is actually one of my kind of major pain points as an Astro coming from White Mage. Like, topping up from Living Dead is really annoying when you're just used to being able to hit one button and not drop Cleric. Like, you can save Sinistry for it, and with good gear, like a Benefic to Essential Dignity and then Aspected Benefic will usually top it off. But now you've used your Sinistry, a 90-second cooldown just for that, right? Yeah. And you had to use 2 GCDs as well, so it's definitely a pain point with Dark Knight.
Yeah. The only reason I bring up Palette, like,
the comparison.
The comparison with White Mage is White Mage doesn't restrict you from certain team comps. So that is one area where I'd say White Mage is more desirable, I guess.
And I'll go ahead and end the whole Paladin part right now because I feel bad because I can easily talk about Paladin forever, like constantly, because I've absorbed myself in it as much as I have so far. But the only reason I made that comparison is because it's not as liked in the group because they were like, oh, it's not optimal enough. You can do it, but yeah, sure, why would you bring it? In the end, when I start thinking about, when I was making that comparison, Astro versus White Mage, I was like, all right, take away the cards from Astro. What do you have? Who's a better healer? And if they're on even grounds, obviously Astro's better because then you have cards too, right? And so it depends on the fight, right? It completely depends on the fight. White Mage will kind of win out a little bit more on most of the fights, as I think we were talking about, but Astro still does extremely good, right?
Yep.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. Yeah. So let's go to the next part. Bring in the cards. Now you have Bull, which you can use. You have, which is an amazing. People don't want it, but for progression, it could be absolutely a lifesaver. If you do an AoE Bull during like a big AoE hit and no one has the heals ready for it, you don't have the mana for it, or something else is going on, that could save you on that one move, right? But people are going to fish for balance most of the time. But I don't know. Do you guys use Bull at all, Bach, Sai? Do you guys think that it's actually a strong card, or is it just completely ignored because of balance?
I do, yeah. Like, one of the things I was going to talk about with regards to card management is it really depends on what the context of how you're playing. Like, if you're doing a speed run, you basically have to get all balances if you want that magic speed run. And so it's kind of boring in that sense, like, because the card is so powerful, you have to just get AoE balances. But during progression, you can be a lot more kind of free flow, creative with your card play. And so, like the example you just used of an AoE Bull, like, I can remember at least a couple times during Prague where I used an AoE Bull. Actually, like during the Almost Holy ads when we were doing Prague on those, AoE Bull was really good, especially if someone had died from before and had a weakness with like the level of gear that we had at the time. And then also during like the tower phase in A11 with the double whirlwind and all that, when people are dying because it's Prague and you have an AoE Bull, that really helps. Even like single target Bulls on a brink of death player, like I've thrown that out more than once or twice and saved people with that. So it's like the cards definitely are, they're more interesting and useful kind of in a progression environment, I guess. But the thing is, you can't count on it, right? So as good as Bull is, like if you get an enhanced Bull, it's like a 30-second vengeance on your tank, before even taking into consideration time dilation or celestial. But if your tank has to, like, he can't depend on that being there, I guess is the thing. So
Right.
it's like an added bonus, but he can't say, okay, give me a bowl at 3 minutes every time, because it's not going to happen, right? So that's, I guess, part of the rub.
And
Right.
they're already planning their cooldowns according to
Mhm.
not ever having that bowl.
Yeah.
So they already have their cooldowns mapped out, or at least they should, right? Maybe not so much in Prague because you're still trying to figure that out. But when you know the fight, your cooldowns already planned out in such a way, so that kind of eliminates the need for bowl. But yeah, exactly like Sai said, the situations where I would use bowl is one to repair an adverse situation. Somebody has weakness, right? Somebody has weakness, or during progression where you're kind of still venturing into the unknown, right? And you kind of use it to stabilize, or you can stick it on your tank during those two ads that hit really hard, right? So that kind of, while you're still trying to learn to heal that, if you stick a bull on one of your tanks, it kind of helps you get through that phase and see the next phase. So it's nice for that.
Right. I guess the whole reason that I'm even bringing this up is because I do want to lead towards progression, in a way of talking about different types of players and why, White Mage versus Astro, because that's the comparison. You don't compare Astro to Scholar. You just don't. You don't have that comparison. It's always Astro, White Mage. And so and this all started because this was my thought process a long time ago. If you bring Astro into your group, you're dealing with excess RNG to the fight. And the reasoning I say this, and this, you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm being stupid about this, but when you bring that Astro into the fight, A11 is probably my best example for it. There's certain phases that you can push. And when you push that mechanic, everyone has to know, hey, you're pushing this mechanic. You don't need to expect this next mechanic. Because most of the time when you're doing fights, you're kind of in this mental state where you know the timings, you're going through everything, but if you just mess up the timing just a little bit, everyone's thrown off game, and it's very easy to wipe. Astro provides those weird, awkward situations if you get extra balances throughout things like A11. Am I crazy for thinking that, or is that not a downfall in any way?
I think with the way that Creator works, and actually I was going to mention earlier that part of the reason that the 20% balance is, I mean, most people probably think that's an overreaction on Square's part, right? And that's why Astro is meta. But if you think about how it actually plays into the way that they designed the fights this tier, it just compounds the issue, right? Because there's so many little things you can skip, like in all the fights. Like in A10, you can skip the first blight mechanic, right? Like if you have the perfect comp and really good players and you have balance, like you can skip, like you skip the tank swap, then you skip the ad, you skip a tank buster, and you skip a blight. There's like all these different things, kind of what you're talking about. But I guess what I would say is that problem already exists. Like even you're gonna have that problem in Creator just with when your gear changes, or when you crit more than usual, or maybe your healers start getting more comfortable, so they're putting out DPS. You're gonna start phasing differently. And so you have to deal with that problem anyway. But I guess I would agree with you in the sense that, like, if you have, like a party balance in a spot you didn't before, that's going to move the needle a lot more, right? So there is kind of extra RNG there in terms of phasing, and obviously you can't depend on the balance being there, right? Like you have to be able to make the DPS check without it. So,
right.
Yeah, I definitely, there's something to what you're saying there, yeah.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna. So you said before the show we're gonna agree on everything, but I'm gonna disagree on this one point
Okay.
actually.
Sure.
Okay.
Kind of. I think in this tier specifically, the only really undesirable phase push that you get is in A11. The rest of them are desirable. The rest of them you're just like, oh sweet,
Are you talking about like right at the beginning, or?
Yeah, like towards the beginning, like I guess the point you were trying to make, Frosty, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the 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 fact that balance is so powerful, it creates a DPS variance
Hmm.
within your own group, even though you're playing with the same team, same players.
Same
There's going to
exact
be
way
that
you're. Yeah.
variance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, there's going to be that variance. So because of that variance, you're going to see weird phase pushes, and sometimes that's bad. But the only phase where I think that's the only fight that's going to be bad in is it's going to be A11. And that's when you start to, kill the boss a few times and you're starting to get gear. Now you're going to get phase pushes you're not used to.
Hmm.
But I think even if balance wasn't that powerful, that's going to happen anyway because from my experience, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, from my experience, those phase pushes, whether you get them or not, are less contingent on balances and more on the order of the mechanics you get, which is randomized by the fight itself. So
Mm.
that determines more so than balance RNG what the phases are going to look like, right?
Hmm. Oh yeah.
And not only that, but I guess once you have a fight on farm, I don't know if you guys do this, but we tend to wait on having an AoE and a balance before we pull. So that controls the variance somewhat.
Right.
Like if you, especially in a fight like that where you don't want that variance. So the variance is only created by the second balance that you throw, because that first one is a constant,
Yeah.
right? But there's that non-constant factor, which is sometimes you get the Shiva optical, and then you get the edge optical, and sometimes it's the opposite. It's the other way around, and that alone can determine what kind of phase pushes you get.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I don't think it's that bad, the fact that balances causes phase pushes. Um, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. It doesn't really hurt you.
Yeah, and when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about in terms of pure progression. Like, haven't cleared the fight yet, and still learning the fight, trying to get used to the fight. And I think that I guess you're right. It doesn't really add that much to it, but I feel like it adds a little bit more. But maybe that whole feeling outweighs. I don't know. Maybe getting those balances are better in the end than not getting them at all. If you're going to have to
Yeah.
just learning the extra little bits and ifs and ands and buts and everything that will happen during that fight. If you get another balance, if you get another something else, the fight will react a little bit differently. And you just have to have people who understand that's going on. But if you're in a very
Yes.
new group, people who, new players, new everything, that could really screw a group up. At least I think it does. If it's a whole group of players who are raiding for the very first time and they're trying to learn everything and they're trying to get into the game, but they have an Astro in their group, I think it adds the extra RNG that might be a little bit too much for some people. But then again, I'm talking about like bare minimum people who are still working on A12 right now,
I mean, these people, they're also going in, they probably aren't doing the most optimal DPS rotations.
Oh, yeah,
They're trying to figure out the fight. So, I mean, it kind of works out.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. Astros are fine, guys. They're not horrible. I tried to play devil advocate right now. I'm doing everything I can to play devil's advocate. But Astro, I think when we were doing our progression, Kerr, you would go white mage at the very beginning of the fight, and then eventually you would kind of get an Astro as you were getting more used to it. Do you feel like that was just you getting more comfortable with the fight? You felt like it was better to play white mage to get more comfortable with the fight than move over to Astro when you kind of understood a little bit more, or what?
It was more of a thing with if something unexpected happened, like you took a tank buster without a cooldown, then it's a little bit harder as an Astro to react to that immediately and recover, because with white mage you immediately have Tetra or Benediction and you can just get back on your feet and keep going. So in my perspective, that's why I went white mage rather than Astro.
Because I would mess up.
It's just like the group
Threw
in
you under the
general.
bus, dude.
Like
I
if
gotcha.
a DPS died or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's recoverable now anyway, but I don't know. It's like what they said. You're not always going to have a bowl. You're not always going to have,
Right.
certain, like, presence of mind
Right.
where you can immediately just recover from whatever mistake just happened. So,
Okay. Sai, did you run with basically Astro the entire time? Did you ever play white mage at all during Creator?
I played. It's actually kind of funny. I played Astro the entire time from the beginning, and then I had this idea in my mind. I'm a white mage at heart, I guess, right? Because since 2.0 through Midas, I've always played white mage, and so my idea was, when we do our alt group, I'm gonna do it on white mage. So, I did everything on my main as Astro, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it as white mage on my alt. And I think even before the first raid session was done on our alt group, it's like, well, I guess I'm doing Astro in both. Like, I don't know. Like, it's something about, like, I advocated for white mage having stronger heals, right? Which I still believe I have reasons to think that way, but it's not really necessary in this tier. So one of the factors was, well, it's pretty easy to, like, if you know the fight and you played white mage a lot, it's not like you need a whole bunch of pulls to kind of convert your Astro play to white mage play, but that's one factor. And I wasn't feeling like the strength of white mage was really gaining me anything. So it was like I ended up on Astro before our first raid was done.
That's an extremely good point. The point that, there's a cap to how much you actually have to heal, right? And then you hit a certain point to where if everyone's doing what they should, then you don't have to really heal more than you need to, and you can have tools to do other things besides just heal. But then again, you can do those other things no matter what, even if you are hitting that cap or not hitting that cap, because those tools are completely on the side, not related to your mana or anything else. Or am I just reading that incorrectly?
Yeah, like I think like Astro's heal, like if you take away the cards, the healing's really close to white mage, other than like some of the AoE throughput that I mentioned earlier. But I definitely think depending on the tier, like you could get a tier that was designed in such a way that would incentivize white mage a lot more than creator is, like for sure. And this tier is just not that tier. Like aside from Photon, that's the only real area where I'm like, okay, well, we have to top all the way up, and all I can do is 300 potency per GCD, and this is kind of lame. Like, I mean, to give you an idea, like sometimes I'll do 4 AoE casts in a row after a Photon in A11, and that's something feels wrong about that, right? As a healer, whereas on white mage I would not have to do that. But other than that particular spot, it's just there's no, the incentive is not high enough to go for, that little edge in throughput that white mage is going to give you. So unfortunately, but I mean, I have played around with it a little bit. I mean, that was your original question, white mage in this tier, and I have played around it a little bit, and I was actually kind of disappointed, and that's coming from someone that I really love white mage, but I was just a little bit disappointed, I guess.
I'm looking over at chat, and I don't know if you guys know Vanna or not, but every time he types, all I see is
boy.
Oh, he just hits like random letters, and so I don't know if he's just like frustrated in some way or what. But like every time I look over, I just see a random series of letters out of just randoms. I don't know.
Vanna was actually my co-healer for Midas. So like, he was my co-healer for Double or Nothing, and I'm just gonna say he's probably a better Astro than I am. He's like Astro God, so maybe you should have had him on instead. But
well, he didn't have Hoops promoted him, dude.
Yeah, I know he didn't have Hoops as his advocate, but I'm not watching the chat, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's fine.
Frustrated by.
That's all right. All right, so I don't know if we went off on a tangent. We got into this conversation, and I figured it was actually kind of good and healthy to talk about where Astro is in the game right now. And why people are playing Astro, and besides balance, right? That's the decision everyone really has is, hey, you play this job because you can provide balance for the group and it kills phases faster, which is super beneficial in a lot of the fights, but balance doesn't really, I don't know. Would you guys say that balance still helps out groups that have issues learning their rotation? Like if you have bad DPS in your group, is balance still as strong as it would be if you had good DPS? I mean, obviously you're not putting out as much damage, but the extra DPS you're getting from that to push the phase that much more, does it get completely negated just because you have a bad group? Don't know if that's a stupid question or not.
It's probably too. I'm going to let Bach answer this one first, actually.
Not at all. I mean, whether you're a low DPS group or a really skilled high DPS.
You completely went mute. I don't know what happened there, Bach.
Oh, wait, what?
There you go. There you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. What was the last thing I said?
Whether you're
I'll
low
start
DPS
over.
or high DPS. Yeah,
Okay.
go.
Yeah,
Sorry.
whether you're a low DPS group or a high DPS group, like damage is damage, right?
Mhm.
And it's gonna help you the same way, whether you're a low DPS group or a high DPS group.
Mhm.
So I think balance is super valuable for that. I mean, shortening a phase, skipping a mechanic, shortening a phase, or just shortening the fight in general, right?
Mhm.
That's gonna pay dividends later on, because that could basically be the difference between seeing 3 puddle sets or 2 puddle sets in a fight like A12, right?
Right.
So that shaves a lot off of your prog.
Mhm.
And I don't know, it's just less to learn and fewer things that can go wrong, right?
Mhm. I gotcha. So I guess another question I have here is the importance of having that extra DPS throughout these clears. Most people who are progressing and haven't cleared a fight yet, they're going to see the majority of the mechanics for each fight, right? There's not going to be a lot of skips. Like Zorvan is a completely different situation where Soar is skipped almost every single time, unless if you have you have 2 tanks in there, then you disband a group, right?
Right. Sure.
Okay. Yeah. So the fact that people, these fights, you have to figure out all these mechanics, whether you have an Astro in your group or not, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So it does matter if you have a group that is like just super great at the game. No matter what, they're going to skip these phases at the beginning. That's amazing. But when you go back to again, people who are progressing and average raiders to like high, reasonably skilled raiders going into content, they will see every single mechanic on their first clear. And having that extra DPS, I guess, doesn't feel... All right, I'm saying this as our group cleared A11 with all 3 towers almost up going into the second set of restarting that whole rotation. You know, where he starts GA 100 again? We got to, I think, 2 whirlwinds afterwards.
Okay.
And so, like, we did it with a very, very slow DPS group. And so, to me, it didn't feel as important. But if we did skip that stuff, I guess in the end, it would have made that fight easier. But I don't know. I feel like you just wouldn't have... Okay, Bach, when you cleared A11 for the first time, you guys were running Astro, of course. When did you clear? What phase did you clear A11?
We cleared like where we were in the fight.
Yeah. On that last phase.
I think is that the whirlwind right before the GA 100.
Okay, so kind of close to it, but not that bad, right?
Yeah, we're getting there. It would have killed us. We had 1 tower left and it had 1 HP.
Yeah, I think
1 HP. Wow.
Sai, where were you when you guys cleared it?
I don't remember exactly, but it sounds like we were right about where Box Group was, because I think we were between, when he does the limit cut and you have to break the shield, we were somewhere between there and the GA 100. I know it was before the GA 100.
Did you get the 3rd ad?
I don't think so. I didn't know there was a 3rd ad.
3rd ad?
Oh, Ed.
Oh, Ed.
Okay. The final phase. Yes. Yes.
Well, right at the start of that phase. Yeah, that's right at the beginning. We got that for sure.
No, yeah.
No.
Oh,
the one in the final phase.
Well, there's only 1 ad in the final phase.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't see that?
It happens later on, like after you have to break that shield.
Yeah.
That would be the 4th in the fight, though, right? Because there's an Ed at the beginning, there's one in Pyretic, then there's one after the second numbers, and you're saying there's an additional one after that?
So sorry. No, yeah, after the second numbers. Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry.
Okay.
So you still got that, and you still have to break the
sure.
shield.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my bad.
Yeah. So you guys were a little bit like, you cleared it before that GA 100. We cleared it like a little bit after GA 100, but we still cleared it in the end. Without that extra DPS, and I think that's just coordination. I guess in the end, my whole point being that this tier doesn't require that extra DPS, just people believe it requires that extra DPS. Would you say that's true, or no?
Requires? No.
Okay.
Does it help? Yes.
Right. Right, because you don't have to learn those last bits of mechanics. Okay. If new players came into the game and they're like, hey, we want to start doing the Savage, would you tell them to play the optimal meta group, or just tell them to play whatever?
Play whatever.
Play whatever? Okay.
Play what you're most comfortable on. Meta is overrated, honestly. Go for the comfort pick. If you're more comfortable on White Mage, and if you feel like you can contribute better and you'll make fewer mistakes on White Mage, just play White Mage. I think that'll be better. Because at the end of the day, you want to learn things quickly, and you want to be consistent, and if you're learning a new job at the same time as learning a new fight, right? Just because it's the meta pick, it'll probably hinder more than it'll help.
Hey guys, you are bashing Dark Knight Paladin, but if you play Dark Knight Paladin, you don't got to bring a monk.
Yeah, I don't like to think about Dark Knight Paladin.
Oh god. All right. So, anyways, going forward with that, talking about the type of player who plays Astro and everything else, do you think that I consider Paladin a very low skill job and Dark Knight a very more advanced skill job? Would you guys agree with that?
Dark Knight's not that bad, actually. But
I mean, the mana management I think is kind of ridiculous to kind of keep up with.
There's more micromanagement, and there are a few more things to think about. But I would say that Dark Knight's harder to play, but not by a wide margin. But
Okay.
yeah, I get your point. Yeah.
All right. Would you compare White Mage and Astro to the same kind of situation, to where White Mage is a little bit easier to play and Astro is a little bit more advanced?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. So that being said, if a player is just kind of okay at the game, they're just playing to go through the content, they shouldn't play Astro if they don't feel like they can keep up with all the management that Astro requires? Like keeping up with cards and being inefficient with cards, being inefficient with how you're doing your healing. If you could be more efficient on White Mage, would they preferably go to White Mage?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
because it's easier to be more efficient on White Mage, right?
Is it easier? Well, that depends from person to person, because I'm one of those weird guys who played Astro before they really learned White Mage. So I'm like a very small, weird demographic. So when I play White Mage, I'm a little not used to like certain things about it, right?
Right.
Like dot timers and stuff. So Astro is more my comfort zone, and it's kind of weird to say that, because that concept might be foreign to a lot of people who started healing, way early on before Astro even existed, right? But all things considered, it's just a personal preference, right? As far as what you're comfortable on.
Okay.
Theoretically, Astro's stronger than White Mage, but that's not going to matter too much if you're 10 times more comfortable on White Mage.
Sai, you are super comfortable in White Mage, obviously, doing world first and everything else with it. Do you feel Astro is like a way more advanced and harder to keep up with job than White Mage?
I don't know if I want to say way more advanced, but it most likely will feel that way when you first start, just because you have this extra thing to deal with, which is the cards. And to do that well, you have to be like drawing and redrawing and playing your cards like between your GCDs, right? Without slowing your actual cast down. And that kind of requires seeing the card or the combinations of cards and basically making a decision immediately about what the best thing is to do with those cards. Whereas that's just an overhead you don't have to worry about in terms of White Mage, I guess. The other part of it is that the cooldowns are a bit more nuanced and specialized on Astrologian. Like if you just read through them, like compare Divine Seal to Sinistry, and you'll see that Divine Seal is just a straight 30% healing buff, whereas Sinistry
There's less text on the toolbox.
Yeah, there's exactly, right. Like that's one way to look at it. Like
the text thing, yeah.
And they're almost all like that. Like if you just go straight across the board, Divine Seal versus Sinistry, Presence of Mind versus light speed,
Light speed. That's a
asylum
good point.
versus your bubble. There's just
Uh,
more to think about in every single case for Astro, and plus the cards, plus other things to think about, like where you should be putting your time dilations and celestial oppositions and stuff. So I do think that there's just the best way I could put it is, and part of this is because I have a strong white mage background, but I feel like just almost I just feel it's almost a fact that on white mage at any time, figuring out what you should be doing right now with this GCD is a simpler and like more straightforward objective thing than on Astro. Like Astro, you have choices about what you want to be extending, and there's more room for like different styles of players to come out, I guess.
Yeah.
It's just...
Okay.
Sorry to build on a point that Sai had about like cards. Like if you think about it, the things that make Astro and White Mage different. Well, White Mage has like Cure 3, which you can use in certain situations. You have Assize, which you could use offensively or defensively, and you have Benediction. And then if you look at the things that Astro has that White Mage doesn't, cards comes to the forefront of that. Sure, you got mitigation, but cards, cards is an extra thing to manage, right? It makes your job harder, whereas having extra healing options makes your job easier. So in that sense, yeah, I guess White Mage is would be easier.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I meant to stress, which I probably didn't, is that it's just one of those practice things. So like if you're starting with Astro and the cards feel overwhelming, like at first you're gonna get into like healing situations where people are dying and it's kind of like I need to fix a situation now, right? From a healing aspect, and your draw is gonna come off cooldown, and you don't have time to deal with your cards right then, right? Because you're kind of a new Astro and you're just learning the ropes. But eventually, just through practice, you're going to get to the point where even in one of those nightmare situations, you're taking care of everything and you're still using your cards. But it's kind of a daunting thing at first, but it's basically just a matter of practice. Like eventually, like if you can heal well, eventually the card thing will click and come along as well. Just as long as you play the class enough, it'll come.
Okay. Kerr, I'm going to ask you this next question. If there's no visible difference to you playing Astro or White Mage, the group didn't care, no matter what, you're just playing it, play style wise, would you prefer White Mage or Astro?
Probably Astro at this point.
Is it just more fun to play?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more fun. There's a lot more stuff you can play around with too, like just the different toolkits. I mean, if you played White Mage for so long,
right,
something a little bit different is kind of nice. So.
Okay. And real quick, Bach side, if there's absolutely no difference between the jobs at all between White Mage and Astro with what they provide for the group, and there was no meta involved, there's nothing else, playstyle wise, which would you prefer, the Astro or the White Mage?
Astro.
Astro? Okay.
Yeah, I really gravitate towards support jobs, like ones that contribute in ways like outside of the holy trinity of tanking, healing, and DPSing. You're kind of augmenting your teammates' ability to do those things. So that's always been really fun to me, whatever game I play. So Astro's like right up my alley.
I gotcha. Sai?
For me, I think it would just depend on my mood and the day of the week more than anything, because I can have a lot of fun on both.
Nice.
So yeah, if we're not talking about what I'm, is this going to be the most optimal thing for the group, I can have a ton of fun on either class. So it would just depend on if I had been playing Astro for like a week, I would probably want to do White Mage.
Okay. And I'm kind of leaning this conversation towards the implementation of Astro to the game and how Square Enix brought this job into the game. Because if we go back in the old days of 3.0, Astro was considered the very worst job in the entire game. Would you guys agree with that?
I've heard the nightmare stories. I wasn't around for that.
Mm-hmm.
I heard the nightmare stories. I looked at the buffs that they've gotten, over the years. and or I guess over the months,
Yeah.
and
Well, kind
I
of years.
was
Yeah.
like, yeah, I guess. And I was just like, whoa, Astro didn't have that before. That must have been awful,
Yeah.
right? So yeah.
Yeah, actually, I compiled the like I went through all of the patch notes and kind of compiled them. Those were kind of easy to find. The hard thing to find was um, in the 3.0 patch notes. It doesn't actually say what the abilities originally did. It just said the names, but eventually was able to find some websites with kind of just Astro out of the box at 3.0. And I had leveled it just in case for Gordius. Because my team was doing World Prog, we didn't really know if we were going to need it. So in that type of group, you have to level it just in case. And it just was never relevant, so I didn't have to worry about it. But going back, looking at the patch notes, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to actually say that it was pretty terrible. And so basically, there's a laundry list of reasons, but potencies on healing spells were pretty low. Like Benefic 1 was 380, Benefic 2 was 620. I think the biggest offender was the personal regen only ticked for 100 potency per tick, which you have to compare with White Mage's 150, right? There were MP issues because you didn't have a size, and that was before they buffed Luminiferous Aether. There was also threat issues because they didn't have... Like, Shroud is much better for threat than Luminiferous Aether, right? Shroud cuts your threat in half, and as soon as you use it, you're basically good for a very long time, whereas Luminiferous Aether works more like a quelling, where you get less threat while it's up. So there were MP issues, there were threat issues, there were potency issues. Then if you look at the cooldowns, like, I had forgotten about this, but Disable back then it just reduced the potency of the next action. It lasted for 10 seconds, but it only was going to reduce the potency of the next thing the boss did, which that makes it a lot harder to time, but it also just makes it less useful than it is now. Light speed back then actually nerfed your healing, not just your damage, and it didn't offer the reduction in MP cost either. So basically the only thing you got out of it was that you could run around while you were healing, but you were healing for less, right? So there's almost no point. Sinistry didn't buff your healing. It only gave the Sinistry effect, right? So there was no Divine Seal. There was no way to actually buff your AoE heals or your heals in general on Astro. They just were what they were. Like your Helios is 300 potency. That's it. You can't buff it. And then there were other things, like you couldn't use spread in combat. Shuffle was not, or you couldn't use spread out of combat, so you couldn't prepare before the pull.
Yeah.
Shuffle was 90 seconds. Now it's down to 30 seconds, right? So every time you draw now, you get another chance, which feels really good. But back then it was 90 seconds. And then this is the one that surprised me the most. I don't know how I forgot this, but originally Balance, Bowl, and Arrow only lasted for 15 seconds.
Oh my god.
Not 30 seconds.
Yeah.
They actually doubled that at some point. And then your bubble depended on your sect, right? So you only got the sacred soil aspect of it if you were nocturnal, and you only got the regens if you were diurnal, whereas now you get both. And Royal Road wasn't set up the best either, because the way it works now, basically back then, Spear and Arrow were swapped with Spire and Ewer. So back then, Spear and Arrow gave you the party, like the expansion, right, to the party, and Spire and Ewer gave you the extended time. But you don't, so basically it kind of, they fixed it so that Spire and Ewer are actually still desirable, because you do want that party expansion balances. But before it was like 1/3 of your cards you never even wanted to see. So I guess 1/2 if you count Spear, because I don't know. So
yeah,
I mean, you go through that list and the class was just not in a very good spot. Like the healing was weaker, and then the cards didn't justify the fact that you were paying that price of not being as strong of a healer. So
yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
a rough beginning.
yeah, good, Kurt, sorry.
I remember, like, back then, Astro was called the fairy for scholars.
Right, they're as good as a fairy
We
for
were
healing.
so bad, yeah.
Yeah. Which is kind of rough. I mean, just like I don't know how they get a job, and it sounds like they tried to make something complicated that was interesting, that could come out there and do a lot of neat little things, but they didn't want to overpower it. They didn't want to come out and say this job was the most overpowered job. Oh, well, Dark Knight apparently was that situation going into that tier because everybody wanted a Dark Knight. I remember when we were looking for tanks and we didn't have anyone we knew, and we were just like, all right, if we're going to look for a tank, we're going to look for a Dark Knight. We're not going to look for a Paladin. Just because, if I don't know the person, I'm not going to, say, hey, sure, you can play whatever you want. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to be picky. I'm going to pick the best Dark Knight instead of the best Paladin. Which, in the end, we picked a Paladin anyway. This guy was shit, and it was horrible. I don't want to get into the whole situation. Then he switched over to Dark Knight, and it was one of the only people I've ever had to kick from my group. But that being said, going back with Astro and introducing it, no one wanted it in the group. Everybody was, of course, Scholar, White Mage. It made sense. You ran with it. And they said that Astro was a lot more powerful before the expansion came out. They had a really, really good, I don't know what you'd call it. It was strong as it is right now, basically. I think is what they said, or Yoshi said. Then they nerfed it to that point. Do you guys think it's a good idea when you're introducing a new job to have it even or weaker than the other jobs that are out there for healing? I mean, it had to be tested, right? They had to have some sort of understanding of where that job was. Or do you guys think that maybe they didn't even test it and they didn't even know that job was going to be so weak in the progression?
That's a really hard question to answer.
This is being judgmental and assuming of things that Square Enix does, right? But
yeah, like I don't know. I guess I don't want to be too negative with Square Enix, but if you look at just the fights that they've designed in the past and like the bugs that were present in A6, for example, and then final turns where you can skip like the most important mechanics and cheese through it like in A4 and A8, like it brings to me some of their testing into question, right? Now that's fights versus actual jobs, which is a little different, but it kind of calls the whole thing into question for me. But just looking, if you compare Astro and Dark Knight, which came out at the same time, like they're worlds apart, right? Like Astro was basically the worst new job out of the box, and then you had like to the point where it wasn't even really useful, and then you had Dark Knight, which enabled early A3 Savage clears when Paladins were running into problems with Enrage, right? So I don't know. Like I feel like there's got to be some way that they can have a better finger on the pulse of like they have to be able to tune it better, right? It was way too low. But it's hard to say, right? Like until you release it to the population of players, like particularly those that are pushing the game to its limits, it's kind of hard to know what it's going to be, right? When you're just developing the game.
Bach, I know you weren't here around for that time, but let's just say that you're a game developer, right? And
Okay.
you have new jobs coming out, and of course you have probably no right at all to speak about game development or anything. Maybe you do, and maybe I don't know that. But
suppose I got promoted to executive, whatever, or
Yeah.
the developer of this game. Okay, sure.
all right, and then we're releasing a new healer. It's going to be the
Okay.
third healer, and people are going to have to choose now. They don't just automatically have White Mage or White Mage Scholar anymore. That's not going to be the duo that everyone has to pick. We're going to have a new one. Now, are you going to make that new job on par with all three? It's a new job. No one understands how to play it. They're all learning it. Or do you make it overpowered? Or do you make it a little bit weaker?
I would go with the first one. In fact, that would be one of my primary. That would be very important. That would be very high up on my list. I agree with I totally agree with Sai. Sometimes some of the design decisions that Square Enix makes, I wonder if they play their own game, and I wonder how much they actually know. Because sometimes I feel like the players understand the game more than they do, even though they designed it, right? Even though they made it. But
Right.
I remember back in the day when Warrior was really bad.
1.0?
Yoshi P went out
Or
and
not
said,
1.0,
yeah,
2.0?
2.0, yeah, and Yoshi P said, "Oh, it's not that bad. You guys are just playing it wrong." That's essentially what he said.
Which is what he said with Astro, I think, too, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
it really makes you wonder, But
Yeah.
to be honest, if I was a developer, I think it would be very important to me that all of the healing jobs are viable and yeah.
But I mean,
try
like,
to
no one
balance
knows how to play it, right? And so Astro presented a new style of kind of playability with how healers worked, because you had buffs that you had to manage and work on that stuff. But the buffs sucked when they first introduced it, of course. They didn't suck. They just weren't like, I don't know. They didn't seem worth it in the comparison of what you would lose out to the other healers. But like when you introduce it, and this is how Dark Knight came into play, it was more powerful in the fights themselves because of the magic reduction, everything else, going into Gordius, which of course Gordius again shouldn't have been as difficult as it was, but it was pretty difficult, and so people were requiring stuff like Dark Knights being into their groups. And so when you introduce something like that, Dark Knights became popular because I think that they were optimal. They were in part of the meta, but since you couldn't get Astros into the meta, no one wanted to play it. It was going to be the least played job in the entire game.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's where they probably should have made it, to where Astros were maybe just a little bit too powerful, and then either scaled everyone up a little bit, the other two healers up a little bit more, or...
Right. I see what you mean.
Yeah. And to give it a presence.
You kind of want to give the new job like a buffer in terms of making up for the fact that people are learning it while it's new, I guess is what you're saying.
Yes,
Frosty.
exactly.
And then plan to do an adjustment afterwards.
Yeah.
That brings everything into alignment once the jobs are known. I mean, that's a kind of interesting idea, I guess. I hadn't thought about that.
At least that's how I would think that they would want to do it. If they spend all this time working and making a new job, they want to make it a job that people are going to use. But once we get into this whole... And this was new for them, too, because it was really easy to create the healers just to work in synergy in 2.x, because that's all you need to do is just make sure they worked in synergy, and you wouldn't have two scholars or two white mages. You would have a scholar and a white mage, and they would just kind of work together. Now you have choices, and now that you have 3 that you can choose from, of course one of them is going to be in the meta. I just thought that maybe they should have made it to where Astro could have easily been in the meta, but there's no way. Even looking back, if people understood everything about Astro and knew how to play it, it still wouldn't have been in the meta when they first introduced it.
I mean, if they had to bring like Scholar and White Mage up to Astro level, if it was strong out of the box, then that would be insane, because White Mage and Scholar are already really good. There's barely like any changes to them since it came out, so I mean, in the expansion, so.
Yeah. And the main reason I'm kind of even discussing this too, and I feel like it's kind of important to see how Square Enix releases these new jobs and how they start implementing them in what happens in the whole lifespan of the job throughout the expansion, is because they're coming out with new jobs. We're 5 months away from, actually less than 5 months now, like 4.5 almost, from at least 2 new jobs. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they can go in there if they add a 4th tank, or if they add another DPS. They already added 1 DPS, but what happens if they add another DPS? And of course, you guys could level all the tanks and healers that you want to in the world before you actually start leveling up, your DPS here. But seeing how that progressed forward from that level, they're like, hey, let's do some buffs. And for some reason, I don't know what it was, but Midas, like that whole 3.2 patch and going forward all the way to 3.4, things seemed correct to me. Astro was at a good spot. The raids were at a good spot. Like, it all seemed right to me. Do you guys feel that too, or am I just crazy?
Yeah, one of the things I was going to point out is that Astro got world second during Midas, so I felt like it was already at a spot which was pretty good and viable. I mean, part of it is that the way that A8 worked in particular lent some strength to Astro, just because of, like, I guess, darkness damage. And then there's certain things where when the boss does a J kick, for example, like having the bubble is just like an extra mitigation, whereas
and disable.
So it's partly just the fights, but yeah, I think it's important to point out that, Astro did, like, the Japanese group that got world second, used in Astro, plus a scholar. So I think it was at a pretty good spot. And if you remember, like what we touched on earlier, they haven't really changed the healing since then. It's just been the card management changed a little bit in a good way, I think. Like they made it so you can redraw every time. Like you get 2 chances per card basically, and they made it so that when you draw a card, you have 30 seconds to decide what you're going to do with it instead of 15 seconds like before. They made a bunch of really good changes. Even like the bowl change, I think is, 20% bowl. It gives you incentive to use that card over 10%. It's just that one little change, right? The 20% balance from
Well,
10%.
they also made Noct more viable, right?
Yeah, and that I think they really needed to do. I'm glad you brought that up because even though like the meta is kind of Diurnal, Astro plus Scholar, like at the top levels, there are people that play Nocturnal Astro and White Mage, and if you look on paper, like they buffed the shields like crazy. Like if you do the math, like Nocturnal shields are so much better than Scholars outside of a crit ad low, but the thing you have to understand is that they have to be that much more powerful because there's no fairy, right? You have no Embrace, you have no Whispering Dawn, you have no Fake Covenant, which is really important because that's a 20% additional mitigation. You have no what's the other one? Fey Illumination. You have no Indom, so your toolkit is just so much more limited that the way they tried to make up for it is just like make all the shields way stronger, right? But Scholar still has so many more options. And I guess the biggest difference that I usually point out is that while a Scholar is sitting there DPSing, they can still be doing so much for the group, like just through their fairy. But if a Nocturnal Astro is sitting there DPSing, they're doing absolutely nothing for the group, right? So, and that's kind of like the key factor. It's kind of the key reason that people, the top groups run Scholars over Nocturnal Astros is just because of that. Like you don't get anything out of like, I'd call it like asynchronous healing, basically, like things you can do without actually having to spend a GCD, right? Like, so if you're a Nocturnal Astro and you want to shield or you want to like heal back up, you have to stop and spend a GCD for that. And that might seem kind of obvious, but for groups that are trying to optimize, that's exactly what they try to avoid. They try to cover everything with Whispering Dawns and Indoms and, limit the amount of actual healing GCDs to the minimum possible, right? So,
right. That's how you do world first progression. You have to make sure you have the right. Yeah. Every GCD matters.
Right, but it's good that you pointed that out because I think the Nocturnal buffs were completely justified and really needed. And even with them, I still think Scholar is better. But I think it's really good that they at least brought it somewhere close up to par. And like even as I say, Scholar is better, right? Nocturnal Astros have solo healed A12, right? So it's not like it's bad, but it's just different how Scholar works, I guess. So I'm glad they buffed Nocturnal, even though I would never play Nocturnal. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I'm glad they buffed something that was weak, even though I would never go near it anyways. All right. So the people who do want to play it can embrace it. Yeah. Bach, I mean, you were a defender over bringing an Astro into the group over White Mage in 3.2 going forward, right?
Yep.
Now, do you feel like maybe Astros were at the perfect point in 3.2?
No, actually, I didn't. Well, okay. Earlier in the show, you asked, what got me to play Astro, and it wasn't so much that I preferred Astro or anything like that. I was actually gonna play White Mage, and a friend of mine, our Dark Knight, Chet, I wasn't in his group at the time, but when I was gonna switch to White Mage, he talked me into playing Astro, because he felt it was stronger in A7 and A8, which is what we were about to do. And I kind of looked it over, and I was like, yeah, you know what? I think you're right, because but it wasn't because of the cards. It was because of Disable, and to a lesser extent, Collective, right? So mitigation, and I thought that was really important because you remember the Sizzle Beam that used to just kill everybody? It would just instigate people because you had the 2 stacks. Well, what if it did 10% less? right?
Right.
Yeah,
And
that was completely on the scholar in most groups.
yeah, right. But now that you can stack this on top of that, I mean that kind of like widens your margins of error.
Or you could do,
And
Divine Veil, but yeah.
well,
Sorry.
you could divine veil,
Sorry.
but you could also what's it called? Reprise
Clemency.
too, right?
Clemency.
Clemency. No, go ahead, Buck. Sorry.
But yeah, and then same thing in A8, when it came to those J kicks. And it was really funny arguing with people because they're just like, "Oh, mitigation doesn't matter." I'm like, "Yeah, bullshit. Mitigation doesn't matter. Then why do you wear vit melds,
Mhm.
right? While
Yeah.
having disable for every single J kick is like vit melding your entire party by
Yeah.
10%. That's what it is. That's literally what it is. And you had the bubble on top of that. And if you really needed to, if somebody died and you want to give them a bowl, you could do that too. So I felt that the mitigation options that Astro provided was actually more important and more impactful than the better AoE healing options that White Mage provided. And the
Mhm.
cards was just a bonus on top of that, right? But I guess to answer your question, was Astro in a good place at that time? I would say no, because I thought the cards were extremely underwhelming, and that's kind of the defining characteristic of Astro. I mean, the class icon is a card,
Mm.
right?
Right.
Your weapon has a card pouch, and I don't know, that should be more essential to the job. And I thought that they're really underwhelming. So
Yeah,
I
you don't
thought
want to feel like it's an afterthought when that's supposed to be the
yeah,
whole design principle of the class.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, exactly. So in that sense, I think that needed fixing. And when they said that they're going to take a look at cards, I was really excited for that, because I'm just like, Astro it's not about Astro not being strong enough, because I think they're definitely strong enough in Midas, but cards are a little lame right now, right? So that's kind of where I felt.
Okay. I
And
got
Nocturnal was really bad, and they fixed that too.
you. Right. So, do you feel like the card changes were justified, and that's how they should have fixed cards, or should they have done that differently?
Yes and no. I thought they yes, they should have fixed cards. I commend them for fixing the thing that they needed to fix,
Mhm.
but the way they fixed it was really, really, really dumb.
Yeah.
They took the best card and like just buffed it to like
Doubled
a
it.
different galaxy than the other cards. You would think they would have worked on the other cards, the weaker cards,
Mhm.
or change something. They made some good decisions. I mean, they made redraw instead of 60 seconds to 30 seconds. People overlook that fact because that balance change kind of overshadows it, right?
Mhm.
But that was a huge change actually. So I really like that. I like the fact that your card lasts 30 seconds now instead of 15. I mean, there's some times where that's actually relevant.
Mhm.
But when they buffed balance to the level that they did instead of the other cards, and I was just like, man, did they even play their own game?
Well, the way that I kind of interpreted that is that they just tried to dumb down Astro. The whole idea was to make it to where you didn't have to think as much about what card should be used at what point. You just said, screw it, I know what card I need. And you always just went for that one card.
Yeah. And I know this is one of the topics we have later, but did you want to talk about card optimization and stuff?
You know
now,
what?
or
If it
just- you
fits,
just
go
wanna,
ahead
like,
and talk about it.
if it fits? Okay.
To be honest with you, this happens every damn show. Like, I make this nice little layout. I'm like, man, this is going to flow right. This is how I want it to flow. This is going to be so great. And then, like, we get into a conversation. I stop thinking about the layout. And I'm just like, this fits properly into what we're talking about. So we're just going to
Right.
go ahead and hit it.
Okay.
So go ahead. Yeah.
Well, how about we'll get into the nitty gritty later.
Okay.
But like when they made the buffs, I wrote this Reddit post. So I don't know for those who've read it, but
Mm-hmm.
for those who haven't, basically I kind of separated the schools of thought of how to use Astro cards into two different philosophies, I suppose, and I called them the thrifter and the gambler.
Okay.
And the thrifter is the kind of player who they don't want to waste any cards. They're just like, every card has a purpose, so I should use them for their purpose, and I don't
It
wanna
has a
waste any
place
cards. I don't
somewhere.
wanna-
Oh, arrow.
Yeah.
Oh, spear. I know exactly where you belong.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
And then you have the gambler, who's the opposite. They're just like, I want to go for the whatever gives me the highest expected value. Whatever. So basically, whatever gives me, whatever mathematically makes the most sense, right? I will roll the dice and risk throwing away bad cards if it means in the long run I'm gonna get more out of my cards, and that's the gambler mentality.
So can I pause you for a second?
Sure. Yes.
Kurt, out of those two different type of players, which one do you fall in, do you think?
Definitely gambler.
Okay. So you
So
like
let me ask you this then, Kerr.
Yeah.
Are you a gambler because you think it's better, or are you a gambler because you prefer it playing like that?
It's both. Mostly because I prefer it, but also because I've been yelled at before for giving people a spear and arrow.
Okay. See, so I guess the point I was trying to make, and we'll get to the nitty-gritty later, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
But the point I guess I was trying to make is I want to be a thrifter because I think that's really cool that Astro has 6 different cards and like 3 different royal roads, so that the combinations are endless, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they buffed the cards that way made everything revolve around balance and to some extent around expanded balance. And I'm just like, yeah, that's cool. That's the right way to play it. Mathematically, it's the right way to play it. But I kind of want to be the thrifter. I kind of want to be, I kind of want a job where I have to use all the cards, or
Mm-hmm.
I want to use, I can find a place for every card. That's just fun to me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I feel like they kind of watered that aspect down, and kind of like what you said, is like they simplified it. I don't know if that was their intent. I don't know if they just wanted to buff Astro so people will play it, but
Mm-hmm.
I did not like the changes at all
Okay.
for that reason. Yeah.
Sai, would you kind of agree? That's kind of how a lot of Astros work at the moment. How do you play? How do you deal with your cards, Sai?
Definitely gambler. I basically just go for what it's like what Buck said, like expected value, right? So mathematically, like regardless of what the actual result turns out to be, what should I do right now to maximize, the like average expected result? And so I think he explained really well how they took a situation and they kind of made it even worse or even more extreme, I guess, in terms of you kind of have to play the gambler way if you want to do it, quote unquote, right. I mean, you can be a bit more of a thrifter during prog, kind of like we talked about. You can be more creative with your cards, but in the end, they buff balance so much. I feel like maybe if they did something interesting with spear and did something with arrow to where it was closer or comparable with balance, it would have been a lot more interesting. Because right now, like arrow is like a consolation prize that you can only use in very weird situations, and then spear is just almost just clicked off immediately, basically. So
Yeah.
So, and we'll get into the cards here in just a second. We'll transition here in a moment. But the last little bit is I want to talk about the ending of the evolution of Astrologian, which they did make a mild change recently. And I want everyone's opinions here on it. As they made the way that you draw cards more instantaneous, right? They made it kind of like mudras, or like when you're dealing with your cards, it could be if you click too quickly, you can screw up really easily, right?
Oh yeah.
I believe that was a system-wide change that affected a bunch of different things, not just cards, because I know like reapplication of, I think, Blood of the Dragon and Grease Lightning and things like that. Like when we first went into the Zervan patch, I noticed that immediately, and other people in my group were saying similar things about some of their skills. I got really lucky in the sense that I never had a habit of double tapping anything. So for me, being able to see what card I got immediately was just kind of like a straight buff, because it used to be like a lot of people will set up ACT triggers to call out what their card was, because the ACT will read it from the log and tell you what you had before on screen you could actually see what you had. So it would give you a little head start in terms of deciding what you were going to do with your card. I never did that, but with the new system, you hit draw and just the icon comes up immediately. So for me, it's been a buff, but I have heard a lot of people complaining that they just automatically play their cards on themselves, right? Because they do a double tap,
Yeah.
and it's more responsive now, and you kind of have to break that habit, I guess. But I like it. It's been good for me, at least.
Oh, okay. Bach, how have you responded to that whole change with the cards? I mean, again, it's a system change, but in relation to the cards.
I really like it. I'm unlike Sai, I'm a button masher. I mash out everything. My play is a lot less refined than his. So I button mash everything.
gotcha.
So I've had that accident happen, more times.
I do too. I can't play Ninja because of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I've gotten used to it. Like overall, I love it just because I like being able to see the card I have sooner. You can make that decision within the GCD, right? Whereas before you couldn't do that. So all I had to do is get used to it and just like single tap my buttons for cards, and eventually I've gotten accustomed to it. Like there were some growing pains where I'd accidentally give cards to myself. We kind of joked that I now I have an excuse to balance myself. Like, oh, geez, I guess I double tapped it. Oh well, I guess, yes, right.
Nice.
But but jokes aside, it's overall it's an awesome change. I liked it.
Kerr, I hear her cuss at least once or twice during every raid about giving balance or something to herself.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Oh no.
Oh no! I guess I need to go to cleric stance. Okay, you got it. I'll do more DPS now.
Hold ground.
Yeah, hold ground. Go ahead and use it. So you guys weren't really affected too much. It just sucked at first. It was irritating. Then you guys kind of got used to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Okay. That's kind of interesting because I thought it was absolutely like a nerf to the job almost. Like it said, hey, now you guys have to be a little bit more skillful with what you do. So now the job's a little bit harder to play. But yeah, as you're talking about, I do remember there's a couple things about Black Mage that changed as well with how their fire or something worked because of that change as well.
Oh, I think you get your fire starter immediately. So like instead of having to wait a GCD to be able to use it, you can basically use it immediately because it applies the buff right away. I don't play Black Mage, but I recall hearing that.
Okay. All right. So that wasn't really aimed towards Astro. That was just a system-wide change that kind of hit Astro as a side effect.
Yep.
All right. So with this whole evolution, do you guys think that Square Enix made these changes because they actually felt like the job needed the changes, or they made the changes because of the player reaction?
Player reaction.
Okay.
Like I said, I thought Midas was really strong. It kind of had like a negative stigma, but it's kind of like it's kind of like a sheep mentality, right? Where A tells B something, whether it's right or wrong. B tells that to C, C tells that to D, and so forth. And then A hears it from D. So then
like playing telephone.
that revalidates A's opinion on that thing, whether or not it's actually true. And I felt that's what happened. That happens a lot with MMO communities and video game communities, is that people kind of
self-confirm basically.
So I think that's kind of what happened. And if you look at the statistics on FF logs, you'll see like way more clears on White Mage than you see on Astro. Even though theoretically I felt that Astro is at least on par with White Mage for that tier. It's fight dependent. I like White Mage in 6. I liked Astro in 7 and 8. But all in all, like Astro was definitely viable and it was right up there, if not better than White Mage. But the numbers didn't show it. People didn't play Astro. They all played White Mage. They're just like, why would I play Astro when I'm already good at White Mage? There's no reason to play Astro, and they kind of carried that negative stigma from the previous patches.
Right.
But I thought they were in a good place, except cards needed some work. But I felt that SC just kind of responded to how much people played it and their perception.
So they were looking like statistics, really.
Yeah, they're exactly. I don't know if they looked at statistics per se, but they know it was no secret that Astro was the most underplayed job.
Yeah.
Right. That was no secret.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess they felt they had to do something to get people to play it, whether or not it was actually logical that Astros needed these buffs.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of put on the back burner. It was more about getting people to play it. I think that's the case, but I don't know. You'd have to ask them.
Yeah. Hopefully one day I can. We'll see.
Right.
Real quick tangent. The only reason I say this is because it's in chat. Why does everybody is it like a meme stereotype thing that you say a word and you just put spaces between every single letter? Is that just like a meme that I just didn't pick up and just pick up on at some point? Where does that come from? Does anyone know? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm a really bad memer, so I have no idea.
Okay. Bach, do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I just do it because everyone else is doing it. And cool.
That's what he was just talking about. A tells B tells C tells B.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's like, exactly. Jesus Christ, why does everybody do
It
that?
happens with memes too.
I look at it, I'm like, what is that supposed to even mean? Is it just like I put spaces between letters? I don't know.
More emphasis.
Yeah. Is it more emphasis?
People do that on Twitch because it I don't know, the chat goes really fast, so it's easier to see. I have no idea.
It makes it stand out more. Yeah, and and then they do it to where you can't even read what is being said. They put the claps between every single letter, and they put all the different symbols. I'm like, what are you even saying? I have to sit here and copy paste it, take it down, decipher it. I'm like, man, I don't know, dude. The world today is just ridiculous. You guys are ridiculous, chat. God damn it. All right. Anyways, sorry. Just random thought in my head. Let's. Jesus, I started something I shouldn't have. Let's go on to this next part here. I want to talk about actually becoming a better Astro player, and I feel like almost we should start with the conversation about what Astros do wrong, and kind of where the biggest failures are with a lot of different Astros that play the game. And I don't know how much experience you guys have with watching other Astros and seeing how they play. Is there anything that just makes you kind of cringe when you see another Astro playing, or if you see a mistake by an Astro? Bach, I'm going to start with you, Bach.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. Why? Because I'm the biggest bully? Okay.
Yeah, because you're the biggest bully.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I would say I'll see, it's oh yeah, everyone's missing some TP, I'm just gonna give everyone a Spire, and it's an A11 right before the plane ride, right? And AoE Spear and stuff like that. I'm just oh, please.
They click on stuff to click on it, they're not planning anything.
Man, I don't know.
That's the super thrifter.
Yeah, the super thrifter. They use everything, and I don't know. I think it's really easy to mess up cards, and a lot of people do it. So I would say that, but everything else is besides that, there's the the healers who do 0 DPS.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We call them Sylphies. I don't know if you've done the White Mage. The White Mage.
No, I haven't done the White Mage
quest.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I have. Yeah. Good.
Okay, well, Sylphie doesn't really like to do things other than healing.
Right. I think I saw that meme. That's a meme, right? Did I get that right? Okay. So, I mean, there are people, and we could get into that discussion if you guys really want to get into that discussion with healers who don't DPS and, how that all works out. If a healer says they don't like DPSing, are they just assumed someone who doesn't really like to, I don't know. Are they considered lesser people? Do we consider them lesser people, or do we consider them
lesser people?
Yeah, lesser people.
Oh, lesser people, but it's I find it kind of polarizing, because if you had a monk and the monk said, I just don't like hitting positionals. I'm just gonna hit him from the back the whole time. Everyone would be like, "What are you doing? You're so lazy. You're a lazy monk," and people would give him shit for it. And I think that people are more accepting of a 0 DPS healer. It's oh yeah, but healing's your job. Maybe that's changed a bit over the years. But I personally see them in the same light. It's just if you don't use your cleric stance, then that's such a huge part of your job. And the benefits from using it is even more than what a monk gets from his positionals. Because if a monk missed all his positionals, the DPS that he would lose is less than the DPS the healer would lose if the healer just didn't use cleric stance.
Right.
And I think that's such a common mentality, especially among like newer players. You don't have to do like freaking 1,000 DPS, like right up there, 99th percentile in flogs or anything. But so long as you
if you aren't
acknowledge
100%, like
if
if you're not at the top of FF logs, you're a bad. That's how it works, right? If you're not at the top of FF logs, you're a bad healer.
To quote my good friend Zeno, everybody should be 99th percentile.
Everybody, yeah, that's exactly how the system works. Everybody should.
To which I responded, that's not how percentiles work, Zeno.
Oh God, yeah.
It's kind of become a meme, but it's pretty funny.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No.
Anyway, not everyone has to
Xenoisms.
play at that level, right? But so long as you acknowledge the cleric stance as a part of your job, and you actually, consciously try to find places to deal damage, I think that's enough to say that you're doing a decent job.
Right. And in the end, how I see damage with healers. Okay, so you're healing. But once you figure out where you can apply the damage, you should start trying to apply the damage, right? You'd say, all right, well, where can I do extra? This is how you start doing extra. You start going out there saying, I can do DPS here. On your first clear, maybe you don't do that much damage. You just do a little bit on the empty spaces that you can get away with it. And then after you get used to the fight, you're like, hey, I could do lots of damage everywhere because I know exactly where I need to heal. I know where all the different spots are and everything. You may not know that, but you should put that in your things to do list when you're learning a fight. Learn where you can do DPS, right?
Yes, definitely.
Just find safe spots.
That should be somewhere on your priority list. Yes.
Like I'm tanking. And I'm like, hey, I don't need a cooldown at this point. It's not going to help me in any way. It's not going to do anything much better. But I can use this cooldown. And it'll be back up when I do really need it. So okay, yeah. Now I have spots where I can reduce the damage coming to me, which will increase the damage that healers can output. Things like that. I mean, every single player should have something that they should work on. And I feel like the healers, that's definitely damage. That's definitely finding out where you can optimize your heals, then where can I throw in extra damage.
Yeah, I find that like if a party has like a DPS deficit, the first place I would look to if they're looking to improve, if you're looking to improve your DPS, the first place to look are the healers and the tanks, because usually that's where the biggest discrepancy is between what you're doing and what you could be doing. That's usually where it is.
That drives people crazy, but you're right on that generally. The biggest argument that I could give to people who really just want to heal and don't want a DPS is that it sounds counterintuitive, but working on dealing damage and optimizing your damage as a healer is probably the single thing that will increase your healing optimization. Like, because it basically forces it, right? If you're the type of healer that says, okay, I'm only going to heal, then you're most likely going to be overhealing, right? But if you're trying to deal as much damage as possible, that's what's going to force you to understand exactly how much damage your tanks and your party are taking, exactly how many GCDs you need to heal it up. It's what's going to force you to use your cooldowns like Divine Seal, etc., to make sure that those healing GCDs are minimized. So like if you want to become a better healing, even just in the regard to actual healing, damage is kind of what's going to push you in that direction. So that, I don't know, that's the best way I can kind of try and sway people in that direction, because at least for me, like and the other thing Bach was talking about, right? You don't try to come out of the gate as like at a 99 percentile if you've never DPS before as a healer. It's a long road. Like for me, I went from barely doing any DPS at all as a white mage in like second coil, and then I kind of ramped up during final coil, and it's like this steady process that takes a lot of time, and you have to give people that space, right? And respect that it is a process, but you want to be able to start somewhere. And I don't know if Bach can confirm this, but for me, that's one of the things that pushed my healing efficiency way up, was having that tension of like, how many DPS GCDs can I get out? If I want to get this much DPS out, that means I have to heal super efficiently. And then now you're not only are you a better healer in the sense you're contributing more to your group through damage, but you're you actually heal better. So
Right.
Yes.
that's my argument.
100% agree. Like you have a better understanding of the damage coming in when you're consciously looking for windows to DPS, right?
Yeah. And so I think the other side to all that too is when you're progressing and you haven't cleared a fight yet, it's kind of expected that healers might be a little bit conservative to make sure, because people are making mistakes, and so they have to be like kind of ready and on the edge to make up for those mistakes, right? So you could be a little bit.
Yeah, you should be. You should be. And like, I'll just come out and say, like, there's been fights or maybe even tiers where I pushed that too far, and I probably should have been doing a little less. And in retrospect, since I tried to get away with things that were maybe past the line of what was too risky, that's like wipes that shouldn't have happened, right?
Mhm.
So you do, especially during prog, you have to know, like, what can I get away with safely? And over time, you kind of get an idea, okay, this is something maybe I'll do once we're doing speed runs, but it's not worth it right now. Like, you have to be conscientious about that for sure.
Right. But once this is what I feel for most people. Once you have things on farm, what else do you have to do besides optimize? And so I feel like everybody should be looking in some way, like, hey, how am I going to have more fun out of this game? Well, when you're doing a fight, see what you can do and what you can get away with and what you can do to improve yourself in that job, in that fight. But do you guys agree with that? Is that like the second part of this game after you guys get the first clear?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the thing is, it carries over to other stuff too. It's like, if I didn't try to optimize in Midas, then kind of going back to what Sai said earlier, understanding how damage is coming in, you now have like you now have a better sense of that. And when you're learning a new fight, you kind of have a different perspective now, because the way you looked at Midas fights when you're farming it was just like, okay, the damage comes here, here, and here. I can stop healing, or I can, sequence my GCDs in such a way that, optimizes my dot uptime or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to get technical, right?
Right.
And then when you're learning a new fight, you can kind of already apply those concepts just on a smaller scale, because you want to be conservative. And at the same time, it kind of speeds up your process because you've done it before on optimizing. So, like, when we do phase 1, I'm healing, I'm playing conservatively.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we've passed phase 1. Now we're into phase 2. When we're learning phase 2, I am slowly and trying and safely, hopefully, optimizing phase 1 while we're learning phase 2. And now when we're on phase 3 progression, I'm learning to optimize phase 1 and 2. And the fact that I know how to optimize from practicing in Midas, that process has sped up. So by the time we're ready to clear the encounter, I have some degree of optimization in phases 1, 2, and 3 where I'm dealing meaningful damage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that could be the difference between winning and losing, because God knows how many 1% wipes there've been since this patch is released, across all groups. That could be it right there, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to bring it over and bring the spotlight here on Kerr. On the casual side of healing and playing Astro, Kerr, and doing damage, when do you decide, hey, I'm going to start doing more damage? Do you have like a point where you're like, hey, it's okay for me to, risk Frosty dying here? Or?
It usually depends. Like, first I'll watch how fast your health is dropping. If it seems to be okay and I see a cooldown up, I might slip in the cleric stance. The other one that's more important is it's when people stop messing up.
When other people stop making as many mistakes, you start to feel more comfortable going out there and doing more damage?
Right, because our group does have a tendency to get hit with AoEs randomly.
I mean, that's actually a really good point. Healing a more casual group where you have more often mistakes in the group itself and having to make up for those things. A lot of healers might start focusing on how to recover from that rather than how to get more damage out there. And I think Buck and Sai, you guys are in kind of different groups here, where people in your group stop making mistakes at a certain point, right? You just don't really see it, and it's a rare thing when you see it. Or
people keep making mistakes.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it may be to a lesser degree, but there's there's almost like you would think that once you've done a fight so many times that you wouldn't make mistakes, but there's this weird factor, I think at least, where it becomes more boring. So if you're not focused, you might make a mistake because of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like tying into what Kerr was saying in terms of people making mistakes, it's true. Like there's this fear that if somebody's going to mess up right after you toggle your cleric on, then you're going to be stuck, right?
Which I think is absolutely ridiculous with how cleric works. And I don't know if you guys agree or disagree with me, but I feel like, and it's great for people popping out of cleric to do a quick heal, but once you pop in cleric, you're kind of screwed for 10 seconds or so, right?
About five seconds.
Okay, 5 seconds. All right, so it kind of cuts you off there. Do you guys think that that should be flip-flopped, where if you get out of DPS stance, that you actually have to be in that healing stance for like 5 seconds? So
I kind of like how it is, I guess, but I'm not, I don't know, I'm pretty bad in terms of imagining how things might be. I kind of just look at how they are and then try to learn it. But I think it's interesting in the sense that there's like this risk reward factor there. So that kind of makes it fun in a sense. It's just that if you do have, basically what I was going to say is that more than, this is true for every job in the game or every role in the game, but more than any other role, a healer's DPS is going to scale like directly proportional to like the skill of their group. Like, and that there's a bunch of factors in that, right? It's how well the tanks tank and mitigate, and how well they rotate their cooldowns, not only with one tank, but doing tank swaps to maximize the use of cooldowns in the entire group. It's, you know, DPS taking additional damage and things like that. And you can have a healer that is, you know, capable of 100%, but that gets like a 60 or something, right? Depending, like the group is definitely going to scale your DPS in that way, and I think you just shouldn't let it get you down. Like that's part of being a healer, I think. Like you just do what the best thing you can do on that pull with that group in that fight, and try to view it that way rather than just, oh, you know, I only did this much, whereas this other person did this much, because that other person has a completely different circumstances than you, right? So you just have to take, I mean, I kind of sidestepped your question with the cleric thing. I'm wondering what Bach thinks about that.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. I thought I was gonna be, man, why do we gotta agree on everything? Why can't you be like Arthas?
I mean, I can go and just say this.
So reasonable.
Man, if we want to have this conversation, we have to go back to Paladin Dark Knight, but but go ahead, Bach. Sorry.
Okay, but yeah, I like that about cleric stance. I mean, like, to be honest, I find things, I always try to see things from a game developer perspective, just because it's fun to me to think about, right? And I really like that design. I mean, it's inconvenient, yeah, but it's meant to be inconvenient, you know. It's every time you enter cleric stance, you commit 5 seconds to it at least, so you have to, a risk is associated with it. I like that. However, one change that I would make is, I think that if you're in cleric stance, instead of nerfing your heals, it should just outright lock you out of your healing abilities. Because sometimes you start healing cleric stance, like, why is everyone's HP going up?
Yeah.
And then you look down, you're in cleric stance, and everyone's dead by the time you realize it. But if you notice that you can't cast your heal, you're like, oh, I'm in cleric stance, and then without even looking, you can just do it, right?
Well, I mean, you could also call that like an attention skill, right? And so
I guess, yeah, but maybe it's just because I'm bad and it happens to me so frequently.
Yeah, if someone who needs ACD triggers to actually do fights here, Bot, come on, what are you doing?
Oh, man. You gotta see my ACT. It's like, if I lost my ACT, it's just, ugh, I just quit the game.
Don't want to play anymore.
There's another thing. What was the other thing you mentioned after that, Sai? About
I don't remember.
Damage.
Something about how your damage as a healer scales relative to your group.
Yeah,
exactly. Very much so. And you know, a lot of people measure a healer's skill level just solely based on their damage output. How silly is that? You know, if you think about it, you're a healer and you're being judged solely based on your damage output. But yeah, it very much changes, especially with, you know, your co-healer, your tanks. I mean, I would say that healer's DPS is the most affected by your setting than any other job. Right? Like other jobs, it's just like, yeah, I guess team comp and clear times. But like, if you and your healer are in a speed run kind of mentality, then you have like your tanks are helping you now, right? By reducing the amount of healing GCs you have to do, and you know you're actively working towards that with your co-healer, and you know your damage numbers are going to be insane. But I think take basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is take damage numbers and stats with a grain of salt.
I mean, that should be for like all the jobs, but I mean for healers, that's definitely a different situation, because if someone dies, all right, well, your parse doesn't even matter. Like their death is what caused your parse to go down, not your death.
Especially.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually funny because when someone dies, it's like, well, there goes my parse, and I'm kind of thinking in my head, yeah, mine too.
Yeah.
Like, thanks.
Yeah. God damn it. Cryo, Winsler. I'm just kidding, guys. Sorry, not trying to burn you. Sorry. They're like the punching bag of our group. Like everybody just talks trash about them in Twitch chat the entire time. About them dying and everything else, and I feel bad because they're not that bad. They're horrible. But Kerr gets pissed off when they die too.
It's my MP. Although we have less MP problems on Astro, so it's not as bad.
Yeah. You guys feel like that's true, Bach, Sai? There's not a lot of MP problems with Astro?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Astro's MP economy is really good. Yeah.
Okay, so going forward with this, I do want to talk about a couple things that people can improve on, and we were talking about cards a little bit. I feel like cards is one of the most important things to talk about for Astros and learning about Astros. And the discussion I want to actually start with is some of the things that are kind of obvious. I want to hit on Spear, because no one likes Spear, right? Is there like a situation to where you're like, yeah, I'll use Spear and this will actually benefit my group?
I've only heard of.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
No,
I've
only
only
as a
heard
Royal
of.
Road.
Sorry.
I mean,
You go first.
Yeah.
Kurt.
Sorry. No, I've only heard of like a Dragoon really wanting Spear, to be honest. Everybody else just hates it. And Royal Roading, like Sai said.
Wait, which Dragoon wanted Spear?
I
think he
I
wanted
like previous
the
Dragoon
Astrologian,
wanted it.
or sorry, the Alexandrian Spear, not the Astrologian Spear. No, I'm just
oh
kidding.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good joke, dude. Maybe he wants his second battle litany sooner.
Yeah. Oh my god. I don't know. It's just like, because it doesn't really plan well. Like if you put it on a machinist buffs all line up the way that you want them to line up. But as soon as you throw a spear out there, you're kind of screwing them with that situation.
You could make an argument. You could make an argument that if you could catch all of a machinist's like buff sequence with that spear, that he could get an extra activation out of it. But you know, that's really reaching. I think the reason why spear is bad is because for a lot of jobs, their GCDs have to line up a certain way with their off GCDs, and spear only helps your off GCDs, your cooldowns, right? So, you know, for tanks, you know, they have their defensive cooldowns mapped out, so making them shorter doesn't really help them. For dragoons, you know, you want certain things to line up with certain things, so it just throws everything out of alignment, so that doesn't really help them either. But I think the main reason why I never ever use spear is because there's an opportunity cost that's associated with using spear. When you're using spear, it's going to consume whatever royal road that you have, right? And spear interacts very poorly with royal road.
Yeah, that's true.
Because if you spear the whole group, it's just like, okay, you lined it up really well with your machinist cooldown somehow, but everybody else gets it at a random time according to them, right? So it doesn't really help them there. Extended spear is kind of useless, because if you're going to use all your cooldowns, it's not going to be in like a 40-second window, right?
Right.
And so you don't want to use spear with a royal road, and then if you don't have a royal road, you're better off royal roading that spear in case you get like a bounce or an arrow, and you could now do an extended. So like however you spin it, using spear is just worse than not using spear. You're better royal roading it, or redrawing it first, royal roading it, or throwing it away.
Yeah. And I think when you start talking about that too, spear is something that could be amazing if you had a perfect plan for it, right? If you could plan it out and you could make it work, then it could be really, really good. but that's not the purpose of Astro, because you have RNG cards. Everything's RNG.
Yep.
And so you can't really apply something that is supposed to be planned to a job that has to work with RNG like that.
Well, you could on the opening, and for that one, it's never going to be as good as an AoE balance, which you
Right.
can also prepare. So yeah, it just doesn't really factor in.
Right.
Unless if you're trying to give someone like a parse run on ACT.
Yeah, just one
maybe.
dude. And even then, they'd still want a 30% balance.
Yeah.
instead.
Right. So I feel like this card didn't really ever have a strong place in the game, and I don't know. They were just maybe fishing for ideas of what they could do with cards. Do you guys feel like they just should limit down the cards to like just a handful of cards, like 3 different types of cards instead of all the different types of cards that they have? Like split them up and give like cards dual functions or something?
In a sense, they do have 3 groups. Like the idea is that Spire and Ewer are kind of one category, which is TP and MP, and then Arrow and Spear have to do with time, which is why they Royal Road to like the time extension, and then Bowl and Balance have to do with like increasing potency, or I mean it's basically damage versus mitigation, right? So they kind of have that, but it's definitely a problem that they have a card that, like you said, never fit in the first place and still doesn't fit in. So either they need like a new concept, like something that's actually useful to do with that card, or I guess you get rid of it, which just gives, if you only have 5 cards, then you have more chance to draw balance, I guess.
Right. Are there any other cards that you would say are similar to Spear in terms of being completely useless? I mean, you can use Arrow at some point, right? Arrow does have an effect, right? Or no?
Yes.
I think, yeah, Arrow has an effect. I think Spear is in a category of its own.
Okay. So going into card management overall, Bach. I just called you Spear. Do you feel good or bad about that, Bach?
Oh, wow.
Okay, sorry. Bach, when you're doing card management, what is your mental process? What are you thinking when you're trying to figure out how do I optimize my cards?
Okay. Well, you know what? That's gonna vary from group to group. It depends what your objective is, right? Like when we're during progression, I'm going for expected value. Like if everything's stable, everything's good. Balance is what I'm looking for. We'll settle for arrows. The balance is what I'm looking for, and I prioritize expanded over the other royal roads because it's just the strongest, right? Excuse me. Besides that, I mean, during progression, Bull has its place. Also, I did progression with a very low amount of piety, which I regret. So an occasional Ewer was really nice for me. Ewer and Spire, they're kind of in a weird case. I guess to answer your earlier question, are the other cards the same as Spear? Spear's like, yeah, in a category of its own. It's like total poop tier, right? Spire and Ewer are kind of weird. If you want them, they're the most important card. If you don't want them, they're useless. But they're still the best royal road, right? Arrow, it at least does something, right?
Yeah.
It's not balance. It's not even half.
But it only has
balance.
one function. I mean, I guess you could consider it a function. You could give someone TP or mana. But do you guys ever want to do that, or do you find yourself
in Prague when people die? Yeah.
Okay.
You'll use
people
those.
die, yeah, and occasionally, like in A9, sometimes dragoons run out of TP or something, so you can kind of help them out.
Okay, but of course, overall, to get more DPS out of the group, you would still want a balance overall, though, right?
Yes, definitely.
Because you just let that one dragoon die with their TP.
I haven't crunched the numbers or anything, but I'm pretty sure, like, if you were to compare giving TP to someone who doesn't have TP or giving them a balance.
Well, not give them a balance, but give someone else a balance, right?
Or give someone else a balance, yeah. I think I'd probably still take the balance, but, sometimes, yeah, I guess, Spire has its place, though, like, during Prague for certain fights, I guess maybe, I don't know if our Dragon just AoE'd a lot, but, sometimes I try to look for a Spire for him or the Bard. And Ewers, if you're out of MP, that's the card you definitely want above everything, even balance, right? If you can't heal your your teammates, you're probably gonna die, right?
Yeah. Or you just make that scholar heal, and you're just like,
Yeah.
well, sorry, no DPS for you. I'm just gonna
Mhm.
be greedy here and give people balance.
Yeah.
And okay.
In a speedrun setting, balance is your only card. And not only that, you're not only thinking about that, you're also thinking of where you're using your balances, because you want your balance to align with where other people are using all their buffs, so where your group DPS is going to spike the highest. And that's like, this is like, very high level optimization where it's just like, okay, after the first inception, everyone has their buffs. This is the best time to use pots. We're going to battle voice here. We're going to trick attack here. And the boss is stationary. This is where you want to save your balance, right? And you start to think about stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my card usage is asking my group, hey, who's having a really good parse right now? And then the Dragoon or Bard will be like, I am. Like, okay, you get the balance or you get the time dilate. It's kind of more YOLO, but
Right.
it really depends on your setting. And but yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Okay. So do you actively look at the situation, see where everyone's TP is, see where everyone's MP is at, see what's going on with the group, and decide on your cards, or you're not just sitting there fishing for balance the entire time when you're doing prog?
When I'm doing prog, if there's a reason for me, like if someone died, I have in the back of my mind now, okay, this guy might need a Spire or a Ewer, right? But I'm not. I don't try to overthink the cards. My default mode is look for balance and arrow, right? And then certain parts of the fight, I might be like, okay, bowl and tank is kind of decent here, so I will settle for that. And certain times it's just like, okay, someone died, so if I get a Spire, maybe I'll give it to them. But yeah, by default, it's looking for DPS cards.
Yeah, and I think most people who play Astro right now are going for balance cards. Like if they're unskilled Astros, they're usually going for balance cards, right? Because they don't think about anything else. They think, oh, Astros are really strong because of balance. I'm just going to use balance. Kind of like how Fail Cleave works with Warriors. Warriors don't think about what else they could spend stacks on besides Fail Cleave if they're not really the greatest warrior in the world, right?
Yeah, I guess they try to copy the optimal way to play, and when you're speedrunning, that's all you look for is balance. So they're like, oh, if this is what the best players are doing, this is what I should be doing.
Yeah.
But their setting could be totally different.
And that's a whole nother, like, we could have a whole show on how people like copycat the top players and they try to apply it to their group when that should not be the case ever. That should be something you can inspire to, but you have to realize you're not one person. You're with your group. You have to work with your group and how everything else is going there. If you have a group that is not doing exactly the exact same thing that top tier group is doing, then you could be failing by trying to cut corners in places that you shouldn't.
Yep. Someone might look at one of a top warrior parse and be like, this guy uses 20 Fel Cleaves and 0 Inner Beast, so that's what I should be doing. But that might not be the case.
Yeah. Escape for Options had a kind of an interesting point here. If you could use Spear retroactively, would it not be as bad?
Would not be as bad.
Okay.
Sorry.
So let's actually. Sorry, Sai, were you saying something?
Oh, no.
Okay, sorry. Was that Kurt that was saying something? I felt like I heard someone else saying something.
Yeah, I was agreeing, saying the same thing as Spock.
Okay, so what if you did a whole nother situation where you said, all right, instead of Spear doing that, it just reset all your cooldowns?
That would be insane.
Would it be?
Pretty sure.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, just resets.
Like,
well, all right.
That would be super insane because you would get like 2 openers in a row, and I guess you would have to figure out how would it interact with.
That'd be amazing.
Road,
yeah.
Right? So like if you did it for the party, would it just like put them all halfway
maybe
down,
cut?
or would it still just reset them all?
Yeah, cut all of cooldowns in half. Maybe I don't know.
How would you guys redesign cards if you could redesign something? Like what would you fix?
I would make it to where there's basically, you know how they have the 6 different cards right now, they all they're in 3 different groups. I would have it to be 3 different cards, and then you had 2 choices on using the card. You can say, I want this to be a balance, or I want this to be a bowl card. I want this to be this card or this card.
Interesting. Never thought of that.
And that way your RNG kind of gets reduced in a way. You have to manage the cards a little bit more, but in the end, I think the RNG issue is one of the biggest issues that Astros have, and it's kind of annoying trying to deal with that. I feel like it just needs to be dumbed down just a little bit. And if you could make that
That's
to
a
where,
really good idea.
yeah, I just felt like that would make things better in the end, and I wouldn't have to sit there waiting for a 1 in 6 chance multiple times at the very beginning of a fucking fight to get my balance AoE. But you know, that's the most annoying thing. Reset cooldowns, but still everyone has to wait on the Astro. Right, guys, come on.
Yep, even speed running groups that are like setting top times will sit there and complain about how they hate Astro and wish it would be removed so that they didn't have to wait. This is a conversation comes up before every single poll. It's delete Astro, and every time you hit your draw and a balance doesn't come out, you have to take a little bit of flack from your team.
Yeah.
So just got to be prepared for that.
I mean, do you guys feel like that would be a decent idea to going back to that? If that you could make it to where you minimize the RNG in there, and you would choose out of the 3 different types of cards, you could make it one. You could just flip it over. Like, okay, imagine it's a double-sided card. Just decide on which side you want. Right?
I really like the spirit of the idea. It's really interesting, and I hadn't thought about it. I think it would make redraw a little funny because you would just be like choosing between the 2 remaining cards at that point. So that might be a little bit weird. Like the probabilities, I guess, would be too high. But I like the spirit
I mean,
of the
Machinist
idea
does a
at the very
50-50 chance with their
Yeah.
with all their attacks, right? You have a 50-50 chance of it being procced, unless if you have a 100% chance by using bullets. So it's like, I felt like that RNG was great. It didn't overdo it. It was just enough that you had to pay attention to it. And I felt like if you could kind of make Astros go into that part to where the RNG's there and you have to pay attention to it, but you didn't have to have this whole spectrum of things that could possibly happen. It's not a spectrum. It's not really that bad, but
They would still need to fix Spear, though. Otherwise, you would have this 2-sided card, one side which you never used, right? So they would still have to address that somehow, I think.
I think they should just not use that kind of effect and find a different effect that would be more interesting, more useful in kind of in the moment situations. But I don't know what that effect would be. Do you guys want? Go ahead.
It's funny. Is one of the questions on our podcast on Unchained podcast with Zeno.
Yep.
But if basically one of the sections was or one of the questions was how would I redesign the Astro cards and I'd trim it down to 4 cards, and I'd merge Ewer and Spire so they gave MP and TP, because usually if a class needed one, they don't need the other.
Yeah,
Or
that's true.
I guess Bard uses both.
Bard would be good, but yeah.
But usually when you give it to somebody, it's because they died or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would have merged those, and I would have merged Arrow and Spear, because sometimes if your GCDs are faster, it throws them out of alignment with your off GCDs and vice versa. But if you merge them together, it might alleviate that. And plus, you're taking the worst card and combine it with the second best card, so it's more palatable, I guess. So yeah, that was my idea. But
That's good.
and
That's a really good
I
idea.
think six cards is a lot. It's a lot to manage,
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, that's kind of why they put 3 different effects there instead of 6 different effects, right? Which I think they had before. And makes it a little bit more. You can chew on that a little bit easier, I guess. I don't know. Kerr, do you have any ideas of fixing Astro cards here?
I like what Bach brought up, but I would say, as a heavily gambler type, I guess, I would probably prefer just being able to hold a second card.
Okay. So you would just like to be able to like save cards a little bit easier? Or just be able to reduce the RNG by just building on the cards that you would get throughout the fight?
Right, be able to spread a second one. So in case like I need a bull, then it's saved.
Okay. Sai, what's your thoughts, dude?
I think I'm less creative than you guys. I liked both Frosty and Bach's idea. I haven't really thought about, like, I can look at the situation and say, okay, something isn't right here, but I haven't really thought about a redesign. I guess one thing I would say, which is only tangentially related, is a lot of times you find yourself in a position where you wish you had the option of being able to use a card without having it consume the Royal Road. That would open up a lot of freedom, but I guess they would have to add a separate button for that. But it would allow you to, like, I guess, spread a card and then be able to use it later without consuming a royal road. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, you know, you have a royal road and you have this card, the option to say, okay, I want to use this arrow on my black mage real quick, but I don't want a party arrow. I only want it on my black mage. I want to save the royal road for the next balance I get. But you can't do that, so it kind of straight jackets you a bit. But that's, I don't know, that's kind of like in card management rather than the cards themselves. But that's one change that I think would be cool.
Okay. All right, well, those are pretty good ideas there. Bach, that was a good question, by the way. Very good question there. And I guess the other thing that I would want to... And by the way, guys, if you're sending messages in the chat, sorry if I can't read them sometimes. We try to collect them and everything. If you make a really long message, I'm probably not going to read it, just because I'm also dealing with, you know, running the show and everything. So don't get too upset about that. Hope you don't get too upset about it. It's not that I'm ignoring you guys. But I think Bach is a handsome guy. It's really hard for me to keep my eyes off of him.
Oh my god.
No. Okay, so when an Astro's in a group with other people, getting off kind of the card balance type, card balance is balance because of the balance card. But anyways, when we were talking about teamwork and working together with a group, how does an Astro work with a group? How do they become like super optimal with their group? And I'll start with you, Sai. Like, how do you define teamwork for an Astro?
I guess the first level is going to be with your co-healer, and then maybe you would put working with your tanks on the same level. So you really want to have an open line of communication, both with your co-healer and also with your tanks, because the healing you do is related directly to how they're, you know, the healing that your co-healer is doing, right? And also to the mitigation, like the cooldown rotations of your tanks. Beyond that, I mean, I think it just helps to know like the important party utility things that your DPS have. So like knowing that your machinist has this thing called dismantle or rend mine, right? And that way you can say, you know, during this part, I'm trying to get, like, this is what happens in A9 in my group, for example. Like, I'm trying to get to this scrap line without spending this GCD on my warrior. What can we do, right? And then we try to get a virus from, you know, maybe a summoner, and I'll disable, and then we'll have dismantle from the machinist. Just kind of knowing what your options are throughout the group. Mantra's kind of an obvious one, but just you kind of have to know those things if you want to optimize well, and you kind of have to be able to have the conversations, you know, Paladin, I want Divine Veil here. You know, I notice you're using a lot of cooldowns on this part, but actually I have to heal you for that scrap line anyway, so how about you go a little lighter on cooldowns there? You'll still survive, but put more here. This is the part where I'm really having to heal you a lot, but, you know, I could get more out of it if you moved your cooldown. So it's kind of just having those conversations. That's like the first level, I guess. I have a lot more to talk about on this topic, but maybe that's good for now.
Okay. Bach?
I guess when it comes to teamwork with your co-healer, Sai knows this, but I'm kind of against the whole main healer off healer idea. It triggers me a little when those terms are used, just because I think it gives people the wrong idea of how healing should be.
I got you.
But basically,
so if you want to dive into that too, you can.
Okay,
that's fine.
I think we probably should, yeah.
Okay, so I guess the concept of a main healer and off healer is you have 3 gears, right? You have your first gear is, okay, we need a lot of healing, both healers heal, right? And then when a little bit of healing is needed, then only the main healer heals and the off healer DPSs.
Bach, you still there?
Yeah. Oh, did I disconnect again?
I don't know. It like I saw it looked like it was registering words, but like I didn't hear anything.
Okay.
We missed the third gear.
Yeah, we missed the
Okay.
third gear.
Okay. The third gear is basically if neither healer has to heal, they're both doing damage.
Mhm.
So then that's basically um, how they plan out the healing duty is they divide it that way, right? Where it's basically you heal first, I heal second, right?
Mhm.
Um, I find that very inefficient and counterintuitive to what you want to be doing. What you want to be doing is prioritizing your heal not by person, not by main healer, off healer, but by the ability itself, right? So
Mhm.
you want to use the abilities that are the most efficient, either because they're the strongest or they take they take the least investment, whether it's a GCD investment or a healer investment,
Mhm.
or sorry, a GCD investment or a MP investment, right?
Right.
So, for example, really high on that list is Whispering Dawn. This does so much healing, requires no GCDs. You don't even have to step out of cleric stance to use it. It's just your fairy doing it. The only thing it costs you is the cooldown itself.
Mhm.
All right. So that is your, from if you want to optimize healing, that is your first line of defense, right? Is Whispering Dawn, Embrace, and Essential Dignity and Indom, because these are abilities that they don't use a GCD and they don't use MP. You can make an argument that Indom does cost MP, but you get the idea. So
Mhm.
these are two different classes. This is Astro and Scholar working together. It's not about Astral healing first and the Scholar healing second. It's about using your most efficient heals first, as a team. And then the next tier of heals is like your regens, aspected Helios, and your aspected Benefic. Because even though it does cost you a GCD, they're super efficient, right?
Mhm.
And then finally, if you've exhausted all of those options and you still need more healing, that's when the suckers and the Helioses and the Benefic 2s and Benefic 1s come in, right?
Mhm.
So that's the way I feel that healing should be done, but people tend to separate it as you heal first, you heal second, rather than these heals are the most efficient, these heals come first, these heals come second, these heals come third. Um, that's just the healing part of it too. DPS is like the other dimension of it where dots do the most damage, and then your nukes do the least damage. So
Right.
if the Astro can't get up their dots, you're losing more damage, and for what? So the Scholar can hit more broils,
Yeah.
right? It just mathematically doesn't make sense. So I think if people strayed away more from that, they kind of broke from that main healer, off healer mentality. I think you'd get a lot more out of your healers, and I think that's better teamwork overall. But it
Yeah.
takes more work.
Yeah. No, and that's a level of play most people in the game will never ever achieve or get to.
I disagree. I think even if you do it on a basic level, you'll still get more out of it. You don't have to do it perfectly, but as long as both healers are trying to open doors for each other to DPS, I think even at a casual level, you will reap the benefits. You'll heal better and you'll DPS better.
I don't know. I can't see casual players getting up to that point and thinking about in the mentality of people who are casual playing this game. Most of them are going to think, "Hey, I heal, and this is how I get the healing done, and you can do damage, and that's it." Because they don't want to take it to that next level. Because I mean, that pretty much takes you past casual once you start getting to that point where you're actually working with the other healer to optimize the maximum amount of cooldowns, right? Or am I just
Hey man, you get what you give, When you play at a casual level or
Mhm.
at a hardcore level, um, that's what improving is all about, is working harder to do better, right? Whether you're a monk trying to get better at doing positionals or honing your opener, or you're a healer trying to have better synergy with your co-healer,
Mhm.
you get what you give. So
So I'm going to
yeah.
take this back to, of course, the tangent of what I always do. I'm horrible for this. So one of the biggest benefits to bringing a Dark Knight to A12S is in that kind of same example, you only need the one tank, right? You don't really have to do as many tank swaps, which is what I believe is a bad statement, simply because if you did do more tank swaps, you'd have more optimal cooldowns and more time that you could be doing DPSing, right? Kerr is running away, by the way. Hope you guys understand that. She's flying away. If you see her camera, I don't know. But Bach, I think you might be talking, but it might be muted.
Oh, I'm not talking.
Oh, okay. I don't know. It keeps having that blue outline around your screen for some reason, even though you're not talking. It's so weird. But yeah, no, it's basically if you could technically do tank swaps properly without leaving your DPS stance and then hitting as optimal with your defensive cooldowns as you can to make it to where it doesn't matter if you're in a tank stance or not, you would get more out of it, right? Because you're working with your other tank and you're actually producing more damage overall. And so the whole idea of making it to where only one tank tanks the entire fight is inefficient, right? Or no?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree.
A very big problem, actually.
Yeah, and so I feel like that's something that should be explored more, and that's why I'm kind of agreeing with you, Bach. I'm saying that in the end, you should look at what in the situation you can do with the tools you have between two tanks or two healers instead of just, I can do this with my healer myself. You need to start thinking as a group instead of just the one person, right?
That's actually
Yes,
a really
absolutely.
good analogy with the tanks, yeah, because basically what I was going to say with this applies with tanks as well, but rather than thinking about your own toolkit as one healer or your own toolkit as one tank, you want to think about the collective toolkit, right? So if you're a Dark Knight or you're a Paladin and you're paired with a Warrior, you want to think about not just, I have Rampart, Sentinel, Bulwark, etc. You want to think about, like, the group has a Vengeance available here, the group has this available here, and it's the same with healing. And also say, even in my group, which is fairly competitive, like, we had a big problem in A9 because we were just having our Paladin tank the entire thing. And I was dying because of it. Like, in terms of what I could do as the Astro in that situation, just once we changed it to where we were actually working in tank swaps to where Hoops wasn't starving in terms of cooldown, because you get to some point in the fight where you ran out of cooldowns because you weren't doing tank swaps, and now your healer is the one that gets to suffer the brunt of that, right? So that is huge, and it's the same thing in terms of healing, right? You want to think about both of your toolkits. Like the example I was going to give, I talked about never playing Nocturnal Astro, but let's say you're running like a Nocturnal Astro and a White Mage. You want to keep in mind, like, you've got Essential Dignity, but you've also got Tetra and Benediction, right? So if your Astro is using a Benefic 2 on a Tank Buster where your White Mage was using a Tetra or a Benny anyway, that's bad, right? What you would want to do is say, okay, you Essential Dignity for this first thing, I'll Tetra the next one, and then maybe I have Benny for the third one. And that way, like, now you've gone like 3 tank busters without having to spend any actual GCD heals, right? So why are you doing a Cure 2 when I have Essential Dignity? But it all rests on the idea that you're actually going to have the conversation and talk to each other.
Right.
And I think what you were getting with earlier is almost as a definitional thing. As a casual, once you are having those conversations and you understand not only your own toolkit but someone else's, it's almost probably true to say that you aren't a casual anymore, right? Because
you're dedicating a lot more time, I think, to actually
you reach a new level. Yeah.
And so it's not like, and how I determine like casual hardcore players usually becomes in time investments, how much time you're spending trying to figure things out, how much time you're doing this, and how much time you're spending with the game. Because if you're just casually playing the game, you're just playing it every once in a while. If you're playing it at kind of a hardcore level, you're going in there, you're playing it, you're looking into stuff, you're trying to understand more than just what you have in your own little bubble. And that's maybe just my own little personal definition of it, but I feel like if someone is actually going and having those conversations and they're actually trying to be optimal, they're going out there and understanding more than they would if they're just kind of casually playing the game. That was my whole statement. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Bach, but I guess what I would say is that the reason the main heal, off heal, like, kind of standard exists is because it is a very easy default. Like, if you're not having the conversations, really, like, in the end you should be having the conversations. Like, if you want to have a more successful group and a more optimized group, that's what you should be doing. But the lure of main heal off heal is just that it's so easy, right? It's
Yeah.
like, well, the tank
It
needs to,
is.
and
It's
you do it.
simplified.
Like,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
streamlined.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, I feel that one of the barriers to people improving is that they think that they've hit a level that they can't improve past that. And I think that this level of teamwork isn't beyond casual players. Um, I have more hope in casual players, I guess. I have a lot of faith in
You're an
Oh,
them.
optimist.
thanks. I
That they can do
appreciate the
this,
hope you have in
right?
me.
It's but it's I don't think it's out of reach for a lot of players, and they might think, you know what, this is a more hardcore mentality. I don't know if this is for me, but it's not that hard. I mean, sometimes you can kind of do it without even knowing you're doing it. Is both healers are kind of trying to make it so that they both can DPS, and they'll notice that their combined DPS numbers improve, and the whole group benefits from it, right?
Mm-hmm. I gotcha.
Yeah, I think it's just occurred to me, one way to put it, which is kind of concise, is that the main heal off heal standard kind of, it optimizes like how much you have to think about it in terms of it minimizes how much you have to think, but it doesn't optimize the result, right? You're basically optimizing, I don't have to have all these conversations,
Yeah.
and those conversations are the price that you need to pay in order to actually optimize the result rather than just minimize, how much you're having to think about these things.
Yeah, and a lot of people will say, well, it's just not required in this tier because the difficulty is just not that hard. But in the end, if you're trying to expand, if you're playing this game, I like raiding and I like this game and I want to continue raiding, that's what you do. It's not
there's like an almost unlimited list of things that aren't technically required to get through, but a lot of them would be really ridiculous, right? Like you could probably clear all the fights with your off tank not actually, like let's say he only comes into effect once an ad pops. He's like, okay, now I'm tanking, but doesn't do anything at any point in the fight besides that. You could still technically clear at some point, with enough DPS and enough gear, but it's like you're saying, like if you have the mindset of getting better, it's just, there's all these avenues you can go down in terms of finding that improvement.
Is that Rosie in the background angrily typing statements?
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure.
Keyboard.
Yeah. I hate mechanical keyboards so much. I'm like a rare breed here. I love quiet keyboards. They are the best thing in the world because I slam my keys when I press them. Anyways, I just want to make sure that was her talking about how this is a bitch show in the background.
Yep.
All right. So I feel like we did a lot of covering there. The only other last little bit that I would like to talk about before we get into like viewer questions and everything is itemization overall for Astros. Is there a set rule that you could just make with itemization for Astros? Is there any difference in any of the heal, like White Mage, Scholar, Astro? Is there a big difference within the gear? Is it all pretty much the same?
I think Buck has put a lot more thought into this than I have, so maybe have him go first.
Do it, Buck.
Oh, I haven't put that much thought into it actually, because to be honest, I'm of the mindset that healer stats are whatever. Because like
Right.
a lot of people are like, oh, you have to get crit or you have to, determination sucks
Mhm.
and blah blah blah. I think accuracy cap is important. Probably less important for an Astro. Like if you really don't want to be accuracy capped, your most important damage spells you can still hit without accuracy cap. But I would say that you get more bang out of your buck with accuracy. Piety is a stat that I think is very overlooked. Because people focus on the damage stats, things that you could put a stat weight to, like crit and spell speed. But if you run out of MP, what does it matter how much crit you have if you can't cast your spells, right?
Right.
And the tricky thing about piety is it's a moving target, because the amount of MP that you consume kind of goes back to what we said earlier, but it really depends on your group, right? And how much
And the
healing
fight
you're required
too,
to
yeah.
do, and it depends on the fight, depends on your clear times, it depends on so many things, and even your own skill level, right? Like if you're not casting as many malefics, you might not need as much MP. So it's kind of a moving target where each player has to figure out, okay, I'm running out of MP a lot when the boss is at about 10-20%. So that's a good sign that you might want more piety than you have now. Or if you end the fight at like 6,000 MP and you never go drop below that, that's a sign that, maybe it's okay that I could drop some piety, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like accuracy in that sense, if you think about it, is when you need it, it's the most important stat. When you don't need it, it's literally worthless,
Right.
right? But but the thing that makes it complicated is it's a moving number, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a moving number. So for me, I like to have at least 850 piety, but that's gonna vary from person to person.
I mean, that's how people used to treat vitality, right? Until it gave you, actual damage increase. Is at a certain point you just don't need that much health because you'll never be hit that hard, and you just want to do more damage so you get more strength. Right?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's just yeah.
Okay.
I actually agree with what Buck said. Again, like for me, it's accuracy to cap, and then he mentioned it's overlooked, and I think he's actually right. But for me, coming from White Mage, piety has always been like the number one stat. Like even before, quote unquote, like main healing DPS became a big thing. Like piety was always what I stacked for progression as a White Mage, and I've had to scale that back as I've gotten used to how much more I have to work with on Astro. And so just to throw a couple caveats out about what Bach was saying, you have to, before you change how much piety you have, I would examine, like, am I using my luminiferous aethers at the right times, or are they just sitting on cooldown and that's why I ran out? And you also, the other thing on Astro is that when you use collective or celestial opposition, that can extend your shroud basically, right? By like an additional 3 ticks. So that's one of the first things. Like before I added more piety gear, I would say, okay, well, I could just move this luminiferous aether under this celestial opposition. That's going to give me like 3k extra MP, and that'll be fine. But yeah, I agree with the whole moving target thing. I actually will change my gear depending on the turn. Like if we're just doing Faust speed clears or whatever, I'll just remove all piety from my gear because there's no way you're going to run out. So I'd rather have the other substats. But then usually go into Refurbisher and I forget to change my gear. And right about the time Faust comes down, I have no MP. So you just kind of have to change a couple of gear pieces out depending on what you're doing. And it's with Astro, it's like the body basically you can swap out for Faust because you don't really need the piety. And then there's the earrings and the bracelet and maybe one other piece that you can kind of play with in terms of where you want your piety to be.
All right. Kurt, what's your thoughts on itemization? In the end, when you guys think about it, do you guys just say, all right, what's the highest item level? Then you start trying to micro manage the stats, or like, how do you guys deal with that? I mean, Kurt, I know when I was healing back in the day, I always thought, all right, it's a higher item level. I don't care. I don't think about anything else.
I mean, yeah, pretty much you kind of want to go with the higher one.
I mean, every single time. I mean, because there are some jobs that, if you get a higher item level, it's not necessarily a better piece of equipment, right?
Yeah, it's more for DPS though. Like with healing, you're higher item level, you can heal more. Going to cleric stance, you can DPS more.
I mean, Bach, Sai, would you kind of agree with that? To simplify it at the very beginning, always higher item level?
The only situation I would ever or have ever considered a lower item level as a healer is because you can't hit accuracy cap. Like right now, if you put accuracy 5s in all your 270 gear, you're going to be sitting at 570, and then you need like grilled sweetfish to hit cap, which is not, it's just not ideal. So you can have an accessory on the right side where you overmeld accuracy and you hit it that way. But yeah, in terms of basically item level is always going to win out on a healer. I guess another This is very rare, and I'm not sure if it's ever happened to me, but depending on itemization, like early in a prog tier, I might move a piece down if I find like I'm having issues with piety, like just to get a bit more piety. I don't need, the extra 10 or whatever mind it is. I just want to make sure. But that really depends on what the starting gear is for that tier with the crafted and stuff, because it might be set up to where you get almost no piety and you have a very low pool on crafted. Then I might do something like that. But lately that hasn't really been an issue though, so.
Okay. Well, I mean, that kind of wraps up a lot of different thoughts and discussions I wanted to have. We've already hit almost 3 hours on the show, guys. We've been going for a while. Or has it been 3 hours? No, it's not. Oh, shit. Yeah, it has almost been 3. Yeah. Before we get into viewer questions, do you guys have any? Well, you know what? Let's hit viewer questions before we get into final thoughts. How about that? You guys good with that? Box says
Yeah,
yes.
sure.
Yep. Okay. All right. So I'm going to hit some of these in. Granted, some of these questions are going to be from the beginning of the show, like 2.5 hours ago. So I'm going to make sure that they're still relevant questions, too, when I'm asking them. Vito BSU, first question. Okay, this seems... How bad do you want SE to buff balance more? You guys definitely want them to buff balance, right? After this entire show and this whole discussion, we want to buff balance, right?
Negative 10%, I'll say.
Negative 10%. Okay, that's a good buff. Bach, you same?
Yeah, man. Balance is a huge issue right now, because especially in this speedrun community. Like, I know speedrun is a very small subset of hardcore raiders, which is a small subset of raiders, which is a small subset of Final Fantasy 14 players, right? But it's like, man, speedrunners are miserable, and some people just don't even speedrun because they don't want to wait for a double balance. So
Yeah.
it's really, I know we're like probably not even on their radar. Like hardcore raiders aren't even on their radar when they design stuff like this, and but I think balance has really made it really unenjoyable. So yeah, nerf balance.
Okay. Kerr?
I agree with everyone.
All right. You know what? And Kerr, you do represent kind of, again, the casual side of all this here. So I'm going to ask this next question to you, and you can give me your opinion first. And this is from Vito, actually asking a serious question. Huh?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If they make the next raid's mechanics more mechanic heavy, I mean, would you go with White Mage or Astro during Prog based on how the classes are currently built?
I mean, if it was going back to like Gordius type.
It's just more mechanics. I think Midas had some of the most mechanics, right?
Oh, they did, huh?
Except for like A3 had a whole bunch of mechanics to it. Boxai?
Right.
Is that right?
I'd say Midas is probably the most mechanic heavy, yeah.
Okay.
I would probably pick and choose, kind of like how Bach did with Midas. He said he'd rather have a White Mage in 6, but he'd rather have an Astro in 7 and 8. But that's only with the caveat, which I think the questioner provided, that, assuming the classes are as the way they are now, what's probably going to happen is, 4.0 will come out, and I'll look at where White Mage seems to be and Astro seems to be based on their new abilities and stuff, and I'll just make kind of like an educated guess or kind of like a gut feeling in terms of which I want to start on, but it's impossible to know for now.
Okay. Are you kind of in the same boat, Kerr? Just impossible to know? Or do you feel more comfortable with White Mage, right?
Yeah.
So,
I'm more of a White Mage, I'd say, than a Astro.
So if it was more mechanic heavy, you'd probably go back to White Mage.
Probably for a couple, just to see if, like, when I went White Mage at the beginning of this tier, I wanted to see if I actually needed Cure 3 or a size, because those are the main toolkits for me on White Mage, and it didn't look like I needed to, so I switched over to Astro.
Okay. All right. I'm going to ask this next one, and we'll just kind of go through these, and we can go by, if you guys feel like you have something to talk about it. But I'm going to point out one person for each one. Bach, I'm going to aim this one at you. Marty Noob. Oh, actually, he was asking this for Sai. Never mind. I'm going to point this towards Sai.
That's my worry.
Oh, wow. You're such a tease.
Oh, so sorry. Question for Sai. How important is it to use Fluidor during Aedos?
That's actually very important, and that's a reference to Call Me Hoops, the Paladin you had on the Paladin show.
Yeah.
Because basically, for some reason, in the beginning, like around the time where the steam regulators are being killed, right before Perpetual Ray, he would always count down 3, 2, 1, Fluid Aura. Like he just had in his mind, he knew exactly when I used that Fluid Aura. And then after every time I used it, he would go, "My man." And that was just kind of this thing that he did.
Nice.
So I would say it's very important. Otherwise, your paladin will be disappointed.
Yeah, well, he's bored anyways, right? Because he's only using 1, 2, 3.
Well, that's what he actually said. He actually said, this job is so easy. I just stare at what everybody else is doing.
You should just delay it just to trigger him.
I did a couple times, and he wasn't.
Oh,
pleased.
nice.
I feel like a lot of these questions are joke questions, so I'm just going to go down them. Even though I was trying to pick out the serious ones here, but I feel like it's going to be hard to filter out all the serious ones because I think most people just want to say trolly questions to you guys. Maybe Bach is just kind of the face you have, dude. People want to troll you.
Oh man, feels bad.
All right, so a lot of these are actually pointed at Sai, but this one is pointed towards Bach, so I'm going to ask it for you. Actually, this looks like this could be a serious question too. Moondasher.
Nice.
I have a question for Bach. Could you share some experience on proactive healing as an Astro while learning a whole new fight? Do you tend to save big healing CDs just in case, or do you go aggressively so you function better, but you might regret it later on?
I use it. I just use it. I use it, and if I regret it later, I'll remember it, and I'll be like, okay, I gotta save essential for this, or I'll have to save Sinistry or whatever, and that kind of goes with everything. But yeah, my YOLO mode is just do it, and then figure it out later as you understand the fight, as you pick up on timings and stuff. You can adjust it later, but I think it's better to use it than to save it and just sit on it and wait for a better moment to use it.
All right, that's a good answer. Klops, Layla, wonderful tank we've had on the show multiple times. Warrior, more than anything else here. Sai, how do you feel Stork's game has declined since his departure from Kespa?
Okay, so this is a question about StarCraft, which is I guess a mutual interest of me and Layla's. And I don't know. I guess Stork always used to be the second best Protoss, and he couldn't quite be number one. And it seems like he's maybe slipped a little lower than that, judging based on his games against Jaedong recently.
So I love StarCraft 2. I used to play it a lot. I had to stop playing it because Kerr couldn't talk to me at all when I was playing it, and she'd get really upset and get mad at me.
That makes sense.
Because it takes 100% of your focus. You can't do anything besides play StarCraft when you play StarCraft. If you do, then you've lost the game. But I used to watch it a lot, and I gotta say, there was, I don't know if you watched early StarCraft 2, but there was a couple of players. One was an American player who played Zerg, and the other one was an EU player who played, I think, Terran, if I remember right. Did you follow any of the competitive early StarCraft 2 scene, Sai?
On and off. I'm not sure. Like, I would probably know the Zerg you're referring to if you have the ID.
He's from something Geniuses, Infinite.
Oh, it's probably Edra then, right?
Yeah, Idra. Yeah,
he's a very polarizing figure in the StarCraft community.
Yeah. I remember him getting really upset and then going crazy. They did some weird stuff over there, where like fashion and everything changed. It was kind of funny to see that stuff happen on stream. How people were adapting to living in Korea and everything. But anyways, okay, off subject. Completely sorry. 100% away from the subject. Buck, do you watch StarCraft 2? Just curious. Did you ever?
Not really.
Okay. All right. So then we're going to completely kill that. And we're not going to talk about it anymore because I don't want Bach to be left out here. Here we go. Wait a minute. Oh, here's another serious question. You know what? Everyone has serious questions for Bach, and everyone wants to just troll the fuck out of Sai here.
That's my group.
All right, so Goka here, previous leader of Elysium. Question for Bok Choy: how do you isolate card buffs as the reason Astros prevailed this tier when it is also true that healing is easier this tier? Both would contribute to Astrologian prevailing. So I think
yes.
Okay. Yes.
Great point. Great point. Because like basically the whole okay, Astro basically competes directly with White Mage because Scholar's OP. Okay, so White Mage and Astro basically, if White Mage is good, that pushes Astro down. When Astro's good, that pushes White Mage down. That's just how it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's a great point because I guess the reason to bring White Mage or where White Mage shines is when there's a ton of when you can really make use of their AoE healing options, right? Like say Nidhogg, final phase when your co-healer dies, right? Your
Mm-hmm.
co-healer dies, your stack only has 6 people in it. Well, Cure 3 can get you out of that, but there's nothing Astro can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a fight. That's an example of a fight where White Mage shines, and I feel that um, never mind the card buffs, the fact that all of White Mage's greatest assets are kind of trivialized with the very low amount of AoE healing that you need in this tier. So that kind of pushes Astro over the top too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's something that can't really be understated is that like the one time I'd really want to use Cure 3 is like during Photon in A11 and then an ad spawns and if you cast Cure 3 the ad will come and fuck you up, right? So
That's true, actually.
there's
Yeah.
so I don't know, it's just not very White Mage friendly in addition to being very Astro friendly. And then the card buffs on top of that, so it's a combination.
Okay. Carrara, this is a question that was not directed towards Sai or towards Bach. And I figured I'd go ahead and ask this to you. It's kind of a semi-serious question. It's an interesting question from Mad Marky here. And Sai and Bach, you guys can weigh in too if you want to. But with weather being and with weather being an undercurrent to many things in Eorzea, do you think there should be added buffs for Astro casts dependent on waxing and waning astrology, as well as other healing jobs? You look like you understand that question.
I think it would be kind of cool, but it would be just add more complication, but it would make sense as well. I don't know about weather though. Maybe like stars.
Oh yeah, the how stars are lined up, the time of day, time of year, time of month, astro stuff
Right.
could change. Yeah, yeah. So, Bach, what do you guys feel about that?
Really cool for lore, terrible for like it would just be extra RNG, and it's specifically coming from like a world prog perspective, like having that be one of the potential, inputs in terms of which group is going to be successful would just be a nightmare.
It'd be funny.
So you mean like I think it would be awesome for the speedrunning community if in addition to waiting for a double balance, you also have to wait for the moon to be in a certain place in the sky.
But think about even like with progression schedules, like what if every time the Japanese players are up and playing, for their 16 hours, they have like, the good Cosmos, and then when EU is on, it's, okay, and North America not so good. Like, I don't know, that would not be favorable in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna ask this question for you, Bach. This is from Rosie. How do you even astro when you're a vegetable with no arms?
Oh, bok choy is a really stalky vegetable, so you use the stalks to hit the keys.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. No, sorry, that was a weird thing. Question for Sai. When is he going to be a 5 Dan? What does that mean?
Oh, that's a Go reference. So my screen name actually is Sai Fujiwara. It comes from, I'm not a huge anime buff, but it comes from an anime about the board game Go. And recently in the news, there was this AI program that Google made, right, that defeated the top Go professional. So people may know it from that, from DeepMind, from AlphaGo. But yeah, I'm not quite 5 Dan. That's like it's a skill level in the game basically, and I used to be maybe near 3 Dan, but that was before Final Fantasy took over all my time. So I'm probably sliding backwards more than I am upwards. So we'll say it'll give me a couple of years.
Okay, that's pretty awesome. All right, and let's see if I can get another one for Bach in here. AI useless, but question for Bok Choy. What's your favorite Magic card deck?
Favorite Magic card? Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. One of my interests is Magic the Gathering. I don't really play it, but I still follow it.
Uh-huh.
But huh. Here's something. I don't know. I doubt very many people here play Magic, but there's a card called Birthing Pod, and that was my favorite card. And the concept of the card was you put something in it, and something better comes out. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you throw
Like
in your
spear into balance.
Sure, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you give it a spear and a bounce comes out, or you put in your shitty little car and you get a Lamborghini, or maybe you could jump in yourself and you come back out as LeBron James. I don't know, but that's my favorite Magic card.
I played Magic back in the day. I liked it a lot. I don't like the new stuff because that's new and I don't understand it. I like the old basic stuff that made sense to me. The old man, dude. Okay, Goka has another question here for Sai. Sai, how does he feel about Xeno's A12S strategy regarding healer time stasis?
I actually don't know what it is. I'm sorry, Xeno.
Oh shit!
I'm sorry, Bach. I just don't know what it is, so I can't.
I could tell you.
comment.
We
What is it?
Our scholar struggles with mechanics a lot, so we have this thing. It's kind of a running joke. It's kind of mean, but we call it dock proofing. So we basically make all the strategies as simple as possible for the healers.
That sounds
So
very
that-
familiar
so
to
that
something we
nobody
do in
else
our
has to-
group.
Oh, really?
Go ahead. Yeah,
You
no,
guys
go
do
ahead.
something like-
Is this in terms of positioning where you have to
Yeah.
go? Or...
Yeah, so basically it's like, okay, healer always go right, and the person tethered to the healer does all the thinking, right, or stuff like that. So
Yeah. No,
that's basically how it
we do
works.
that with Cryo. We make it to
Oh,
where he
really?
doesn't have any choices. He just goes to the same spot no matter what, and everyone kind of reacts to that.
So you guys cryo-proof your strats?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
it sounds pretty good to me. Maybe I can get an extra cast off like that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. And I'm just going to start firing through these. They may not be out of order, and there's a lot that's focused towards Sai. Sorry, Bach. Sorry,
That's
Bach.
okay.
Rosie wants to know if you want to go to IHOP after this, Sai.
I always want to go to IHOP. I have low standards for food.
Nice.
Are we invited?
Yeah, I think this needs to be like a group thing at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not hearing a yes or no, so we're waiting on it.
Oh, are you guys in California? Sacramento?
If you can wait for us to drive down there or something, maybe. I don't know.
All right.
Okay. Okay. Sai, this is from Layla. Sai, why are you my favorite? Do you know that?
Probably because I've been playing with Layla since he was back in this FC on Gilgamesh called Damn Jump, and he invited me to some of his Twintanya sales, and we've been buddies ever since. We think alike on a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Just hit it off.
Yep.
Oh,
We actually had a Dragoon Fight Club too, which was basically DPS races on training dummies, and we both were like, he's obviously a warrior, but in his true heart he's a Dragoon, and I was a white mage, and in my true heart I was a Dragoon, so we had a moment there as well.
Yeah. He's an amazing person. I love talking to Layla. Every time I hear him talk, I'm like happy. I'm really happy to hear him talk. But we need to get him on the next show that we do. But we'll see. Maybe I can get you and Layla on the show, Sai. You guys can have a little conversation about how you love each other.
I mean, I don't know if that would be a sufficient topic for the show, but yeah, it would be interesting, just depending on what the topic would be.
Love?
All right. You have my okay. You just have to get it past Layla.
Okay, very good. Thunder Guy, question for Sai. Is Elysium dying?
I mostly just log in and play with my group, so I'm not going to comment on that one.
Okay, fair enough. Dragon Air, question for Sai. March 2nd?
I don't know what that refers to, but I know who that is.
What
I don't know what March 2nd is.
Switch comes out around that time, but that's all I know about that. Let's see. Question for Rinchan. What question? Waffles or pancakes? Or what? Rinchan's not on this show, guys. God damn it. Question for Bach from Rosie. How does it feel to have a non-vegetable version of you in Sai?
Oh.
What?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, that sounds kind of sexual.
Oh, I I think she's implying that Sai is my non-vegetable counterpart.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I'm a lalafell. Are potatoes vegetables?
Hmm. Yes, yeah,
I
think so,
said
yeah.
I was jealous that that Sai is a sentient being, but photosynthesis is pretty nice.
Ah, yeah. Okay. Rinchan, how do you feel about Rosie's? This is to Sai. How do you feel about Rosie's coffee drink choice? Can you please give me detail on the ingredients?
Okay, he already knows the answer to this. He just wants everybody on stream to hear it and how ridiculous it is. She goes to Dunkin' Donuts and she orders like this iced latte with 14 creams and 6 pumps of caramel. And she says that if it was 15 or 7, that would just be ridiculous. But 14 and 6 is just right.
Okay.
And for anybody that wants the image, I have a picture from when we went to IHOP, and basically it's just sugar packets all over the
Is it a
all
link?
over the table. I could upload it somewhere.
All right, you can upload it somewhere and show them one day. Okay. IR Kuza, question for Sai. Is it hard living in the shadow of hoops?
Oh my God, Kuza. Yeah, so Kuza, I'm not really even sure who he is, other than that he's my warrior, Cornelia's friend. But he just messages me every time I'm online and says, "Hoops is still a better tank than you." Every time I log in. But yeah, it's a little tough.
I gotcha. Jurius Feet Greygasm. Frosty TV, why does it take 9 months for Bach to draw a balance? Got anything to say about that, Bach?
Oh, he's the ninja in our static. Yeah, they complain all the time. You know what? I have something to say about that.
Okay.
When an Astro can't draw balance, their whole group gives them shit about it. But you know what? There's nobody more annoyed about it than the Astro. So everybody, please cut your Astro some slack. He's trying. He or she is trying. We want to draw balance too.
Should this be the situation that happens like if you're trying to draw and you don't draw balance? Everyone's like, "No, it's okay, Bach. It's fine. I'm sorry. It's okay.
No,
We'll get it next time."
Just don't say anything. Just don't say anything. Just
be quiet.
Just be quiet.
Okay.
We don't want to hear it. We don't want your pity either.
Oh.
Just
I want your stupid ass pity.
Yeah.
Kerr, would you agree with that feeling?
Yeah, I would, but if they complain enough, I'll just go white mage. It's okay.
Oh yeah. I should threaten to go white mage.
Oh, you got Rek'Sai.
Damn, that was the coffee.
All right, hold on, I gotcha. I think
that was the sugar packets that was left in her wake.
All right, we got you a permit. You can do it again.
Okay.
So, question for Sai from Thunder God. Thoughts on Stellaris Starweaver?
That's gonna be another no comment. Who's Thunder God? Jesus.
I don't know. Fucking Thor or something. Let's see. Jesus, Rosie's like obsessed with your vegetable thing going on here, Bok Choy. Question for Bok Choy. Do you take non-vegetable people under your wing?
I do not.
I know you have not a vegetable, but a food link shell that's very successful over on Sargatanis.
Yeah, we have a Discord server now and everything, so we can like link each other. Like all we talk about is food. Like, hey, if for those who are unfamiliar, basically everyone who has a food name on Sarg is invited to this food link shell. So we have this food link shell, and all we do is talk about food. We talk about what we ate for dinner. We talk about, I don't know.
What if someone talks
we
about
post
like,
pictures.
you know, Astros or Paladins or something in a link shell? Do you kick them?
Oh yeah, no, oh hell no. It's all good. It's all good.
Oh, gotcha. I gotcha.
Yeah, and now we got a Discord, and we're posting food pictures to each other. So even when we're away from each other, away from the game, we could still do food link shell things. Yeah, it's great.
Okay. Question for Sai. This is from XEVL. What spell can I use to banish my mom to the darkness realm? Sounds like you got some issues, dude.
I don't know where to start with that one.
Yeah, I don't either, man. We'll just go to the next
Is
one.
that like a Yu-Gi-Oh reference? I don't know. Ask Goka.
Goka, maybe he knows. Yeah. He's perfect for that question. Vic Roto. Hey, Bach, when are you getting a webcam?
I already have a webcam. It's just I don't want to use it.
There you go. It's not that he doesn't have one. He's just like, fuck you guys. So there you go. I hope you feel good about that, man. Let's see. Question for Sai from XEVL. Can you heal my soul? This guy, I think, has some issues. My mom keeps tanking my refrigerator. What do I do? Guy, man, there's probably some sort of therapy out there for you. I don't know. Sai, you're not a therapist, are you?
No, I'm not a therapist. That's one thing I'm not.
Okay.
And I'm not as good at tank as Hoops.
All right. Bach, this is from Hi Friend. What's your favorite ERP position?
That's a secret.
Okay.
I don't know. No comment.
All these no comments. Okay. And the follow-up question from Hi Friend was, Sai, how do I step up my Lala ERP game?
Don't.
Don't.
Okay. Let's see. AI useless again. Bok Choy, question for Bok. How Left 4 Dead were we last night when you and do you have any comments for people who left us for dead?
Oh my god. Okay, we're doing A10 trap runs on Party Finder, just helping randoms out, and Steamroller was at like 5%, and I was about to do the steamroll move, and I was like, it's him or us, everybody stay in. And just as I said that, everyone except for me and Al Useless totally bitched out and ran. And the steamroller was at like maybe 0.1% and killed us. So if you guys are listening, I hate you. You guys are not my friends.
Jerks. Yeah. All right, I think that's good enough for questions. Holy crap, they just keep coming in. I got to stop at some point. I got to stop with the questions, guys. We understand bok choy is a vegetable, and we understand Sai is a lala. We understand that drawing balance is really hard. So that's the end of that, guys. Before we finish up this show, I do want to ask you guys, is there anything else that you guys wanted to clarify before we went on to the closing statements? Bach?
Nope, nothing. I got nothing.
Sai?
I'm good.
Okay. Kerr?
Nope.
Oh my god. All right. So if you guys have watched this entire 3-hour and 20-minute show, you should all understand how to play Astro. You should all be experts at Astro, and the next duty finder you get into, if you mess up, it's probably on you. Right, guys?
Right.
Right. Sai, say right.
You can blame me
if
something goes wrong.
Yeah. All right. And so, guys, this has been a very long show. This has been a very interesting show, too. I hope that people who play Astro or are familiar with Astro enjoyed the show as well. I hope my guest here had a good time talking about it. Bach, Sai, you guys have a good time talking about Astro? Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. It's been a lot of fun. I hope that our dog here and Kerr had a good time as well. Oh my god, that dog. And I hope everyone in the chat had a good time listening to us talking bullshit throughout this last 3 hours. Good bullshit, though. This was good stuff. And I hope everyone understands now that Paladins are really good and they're the best tanks in the game. All right, I think that's good to close the show off on. Let's see. Do you have any shout-outs that you want to do, Bach?
Shout-outs?
Yeah, man, shout-outs.
Huh. Gotta come up with a shout-out. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna give a shout out to Frosty and all the content creators and streamers, and people who, like, when I think of the Final Fantasy 14 community, the community is what does that mean? It's like, it's all the players who play Final Fantasy 14, but it's also like, it's also like, I guess, it's like all the people who share this mutual interest and and kind of like it's kind of like a fellowship, and I think that the people who stream and create content and do all this stuff that you don't have to do, but it brings the community together. So you guys take that first thing and turn it into the second thing. So I don't know how much that how much you guys realize that means to the community. So yeah, thanks for all the hard work that you put in, and it's really awesome. So yeah, glad to be a part of it.
I really appreciate that, Bach. That was really nice of you, dude. I kind of feel like the show is more of just something I do with my free time, and I don't think I think that maybe only a handful of people actually care, but that means a lot to me, dude. I appreciate that. Okay, Sai, can you match that up? You got a shout out that you want to do that overdoes that?
I was gonna thank you for inviting me on the show, but I don't think I can come up with anything quite as endearing as Bach's response just there. I was going to shout out to my my current team and my former team, though. My current team, Hello Paladin. We've got Rosie, Hoops. He's the one that basically the reason I'm on the show, so thanks for that. Corny, Snipe, Paru, Stevie, Lulu, and then my old team, Double or Nothing. Vana, he helped me prepare a little bit since he's, Astro God. Fox, Layla, Fold, Muni, Rinchan. And most importantly, Alice Lovely Troll and all the work he's done in fighting the monkeys in the world. And our mythical 9th member, Haru. And I'm going to throw in my old scholar, Goka Meikyaku, since he's on the stream, for succumbing to peer pressure and coming to FanFest. That's it.
That's awesome, man. And Bach, maybe I cut you off. Is there anyone else you wanted to shout out here?
No, just that. Yeah.
All right. Nice. Kerr, I'm sorry you didn't get to talk as much here on the show, but I appreciate you coming on and giving us kind of a nice little interesting perspective there. Do you have any shout outs that you want to do here before you get off the show?
Shout outs to Frosty for being committed to the show. Shout out to Casuals. Fancy.
Shout out to the casuals. Definitely shout out to the casuals because you guys make up the majority of the population and you keep this game running with your subscriptions. So we highly appreciate it. And that's including me too. I want to make sure that everybody understands I am extremely grateful. We got Bach on here again. Bach, you're an absolutely amazing person to talk to. You're wonderful to have on the show. And I hope I can get you on a lot more shows in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I have fun every time, so yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And Sai, I appreciate you accepting the invitation coming on here. Even if Hoops didn't really suggest you as insanely as he did, I'd probably still be looking to you because I know you're a really, really good Astro out there. And a lot of times when I need to get people on the show, I will sometimes go to Goka. I'm like, hey Goka, who do you have? And he would 100%, I'm sure, would have referred you. So thanks for coming on the show and giving us your insight, dude.
Yeah, thank you. Anything healing related, I'm down.
Excellent. And the very last bit here, of course, thank you, Kerr. You're wonderful for moderating, collecting everyone's questions and everything. And you have been on the show for a while, but I really appreciate you coming on too. And everyone watching the show, thank you for watching the show. Holy crap, it's been a really great show here. And we will be back here next week. It will likely be an offline show, and we will be doing a show on Reddit. And by saying we're doing a show on Reddit, we are bringing Recif, one of the Reddit moderators, on the show. So if you guys have any interest in that, I know Bach and Sai, you guys spending a good amount of time on Reddit. But we're bringing that guy on here to kind of talk about, because
cool.
in all honesty, I mean, a lot of the community goes to Reddit if they go anywhere to talk about the game, right? So I feel like that would be a pretty interesting show, and hopefully we can get some interesting things happening because people hate Reddit or they love Reddit. So it's going to be fun. So in the end, we will be back here next week, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. We will also be having that 100th episode soon coming up. We're on episode 95 right now. For that 100th episode, I'm trying to get ideas together on what we're going to be doing. It is going to probably be a very long show like we did on the 50th episode, where we have a lot of different segments, a lot of different guests, and everything else. I just have to figure out when the right timing is going to be for that, and then we'll actually have that show. I hope you guys look out for that. Last statements. Thank you very much for Andre Kane for doing or letting me use his music for the intro of the show. Thank you, Blizana, for the artwork for the show. And thank you, all the viewers. We are here because of viewers like you. I feel good. Did I do enough shout outs? Did I thank everybody? Are we good at... We don't have to do anything else? We're good? Yeah. Sai, do you watch Twitch at all, Sai?
From time to time, yeah.
Do you have anyone that you follow on Twitch with Final Fantasy 14?
Oh yeah. I guess Ren and Vana has much less followers than he should. Like, I'm not kidding. This guy's probably the best healer in the game, and every time he streams, there's like 2 people watching. So I think that's Vana XIV. There's some others. But,
well, who's streaming right now is the question, because we need to send a host. Yeah, we need to host somebody here. And so I need to see who we're going to host. Gotta host somebody. You can do it. While he's finding that out, I do want to... I feel like I'm missing something, and I don't know what it is. There's something that I'm missing. Bach, do you know what it is?
Normally you link.
I think we wave to the...
Well, we have to get ready for the host. Or is that the host that you want to do, Sai?
Yeah, Aria.
Okay. All right, here we go. We'll do our waving thing now. And Bach, you better be waving. Sai, you better be waving. I'll be really pissed off. Rosie, tell me if Sai's not waving. I'd really appreciate that. Guys, thank you for all watching. We're going to go to Aria Eben Falls, I think, stream. We're going to send a host out there. And until next time, you guys, please be good, keep cool, and stay frosty.
Bye.
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 Bye.